Hey, Andrew.
Yes, Stephen?
You know how we romanticize the days of going out to our local video store and sifting through endless amounts of movies, searching for our favorite films, and maybe even finding some hidden gems?
Oh yes, I know it all too well. That used to be my favorite thing to do. Unfortunately, everything is online now.
Well, what if I told you that there was a place online where you could get some of them same thrills as going to the video store?
Are you talking about Orbit DVD?
I knew you knew what I was talking about. Orbit DVD is located in Asheville, North Carolina, and online with OrbitDVD.com, they bring you everything your physical media heart desires.
Yeah, they have an awesome website that stays up to date with the latest releases from all of your favorite boutique labels as well as studio releases. Not only do they carry American labels such as Criterion Collection, Severin Films, Vinegar Syndrome, and Warner Archive, but they get routine shipments on imports from companies such as 88 Films, Arrow Video, Imprint, and so much more.
And with the option to sell or trade your used copies for cash or store credit, they really bring that video store vibe to you. So go to OrbitDVD.com and stock up on your Blu-rays.
And tell them Chasing Labels sent you.
And bringing back this week, we have the wonderful Kat Ellinger. How you doing?
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Well, of course. We love our discussion. I think we had you on maybe like
about a year ago.
About a year ago. Yeah.
Oh my God, was that a year ago now?
It
feels like 2 weeks ago.
I know.
I swear.
It goes by
every
fast.
month it's about 2 days now, so
very true.
But we had a really great conversation last time we had you on. You talked about your life and your love of film, and now we're gonna get a little bit more focused here.
Right.
some of your new work that has come out recently. Kat Ellinger's been all over the place and has expanded her.
Very much so.
Yeah,
I feel like we bring her up so many times here on the show that she's always around. You know what I mean? Like she's a constant presence.
You're like a ghost. You're just like haunting us.
Like a spirit, like almost like a godmother of all of this in a way. And yeah, every time that there's a special feature with Kat Ellinger on it, I feel like it's important to bring up because it does sway people's decisions whether or not to buy something or add something to a collection. I think it's gotten to that level, at least for me. I can't speak for everybody.
That is lovely to hear.
Well, it's true. I think it's definitely true amongst the collecting community. I think you're a name that has gotten around to being somebody where I think they want to hear your opinion because you have a very unique opinion. You have a very unique point of view, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Is some of that point of view, where that comes from with some of your new ventures that you went into. But before we do that, I do want to live here congratulate you, of course, again on your Shelf Shock, the first year Shelf Shock Rewind Award for Best Commentary for her Out of the Blue commentary for Kat Ellinger. She did great commentary. So I want to say this live face to face to you. Congratulations for that.
Thank you. That was just crazy because I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
I can hear myself, by the way. That's really strange. I've got like an echo.
Oh no, is it? Well, you don't sound echoey on our end. I think you're good. Hopefully,
I don't like hearing myself.
Yeah. But yeah, we were really happy that's how it. I mean, of course, a lot of great commentaries. There's no way we can award we can acknowledge everybody's great work out there, but I was a champion of that release in general, and I'm just glad that it went to you. It was a great commentary, and but
it's a wonderful release, wonderful release. And obviously, I originally did the commentary for BFI, yes. But Kayla Janice then produced the Severin release, and it's exceptional. So it was really good to see it grab a few things there. It deserved it.
Yes, definitely.
And obviously Kayla getting a big award as well. About time.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, me and Ryan, we talked about it. We were like, should we give out kind of like a separate award that for excellence in either film criticism or just anything like that. We were ruminating about giving a separate award out, and we came up with we both agreed that Sergio Mims really needed to have um, his name moralized in some way. We knew we weren't. This is our first year doing this, and we're not going to have a wide net to, you know, get this out to everybody. But we got to start somewhere, and we thought that his name meant a lot to the community, and thought that it was or the right thing to do, and we thought Kayla Janice was one of the first names that came to our mind that really deserved that honor, because her work is just not only just the work itself is great, but the impact it's had on a lot of people
Mm.
is an important thing to acknowledge. And I think that's the point of all this stuff that we do. Me and Ryan, our podcast is about helping acknowledge the people behind these releases, give acknowledgement to them so that they're not just on the shelves and not remembered. Of
Mhm.
course we love the films, but we love these Blu-rays and things, and how much work is put into them. And that's the whole point of the whole thing. So, but
No, it's lovely to see her recognised because
yeah,
a lot of issues you get a little bit more snubbed by the Rondos, although I did win their Hall of Famer thing once
yeah,
to everyone's surprise. But in commentaries and stuff, it generally goes to the more classic horror guys, that sort of bunch. And so the us younger ones or women tend to be left out. So
yeah,
and Kayla's done so much for so long,
yeah,
like her legacy is so it was wonderful. So I sent her the clip, but I didn't tell her what it was.
yeah,
I
yeah,
just
yeah,
said, "Go here."
yeah. Go to this thing. Go to this time. Um, but yeah, and of course, for me and Ryan, we very much appreciate that you guys are acknowledging it and taking it seriously. Like that, you could look at something like what we did and be like, well, these are just a couple guys that just having some fun, and but you guys are, not, a lot of people out in the community are being really nice and accepting the award and spreading the word, and we appreciate that you guys are taking it seriously like we take it seriously. So
No, it was great, and I loved the ceremony and the fact you had all different announcers. I thought it was really well done. But it does matter because quite often the only time that we'll get feedback is it's more like internet trolls or people complaining or whatever. So it does matter. We don't do it to get recognition in that way, I guess. We just do what we do. But it's nice to be appreciated.
well,
So yeah,
that's we
100% it matters.
well, we're glad that it does, and yeah, there's not enough places that are recognizing the behind the scenes of all this work that gets done for physical media. So hopefully we're filling a hole that needs to be
Yeah,
filled.
I'll say very much so. I mean, I don't mean to toot our own horn, but that in a way that is kind of a lot of what our podcast here on Chasing Labels has become, has been a recognition, or it's oftentimes re-recognition because bring people back on and kind of keep people informed of people we've brought on, keep people informed of what they're up to, like what their work is. If you've liked this person's work on this release, well, they've got another one coming up. It seems like people like you, Kat, and many of the other people we've had on are very much, I mean, not to connect it this way,
Calm down, Andrew.
working
Okay.
class. Well, I'll say working class people in the sense that you're constantly working on an upcoming project, constantly working on something new, and in a way, you're doing it, just to because it's what you do. That's your job. It's part of, not only your love of film, but also financially beneficial, of course. You know what I mean? Like it goes hand in
Yeah,
hand.
but it's not supposed to be your job, is it?
No.
It's not
Right.
supposed to be your job. You're supposed to be, I guess, grateful to do something cool. But it is work. It is a
Mm.
hell of a lot of work. I mean, you guys put this together, all the tech stuff that goes into editing, all the stuff that goes in behind the scenes is work. It's work. You don't just come up, chat about a film, no prep or
Uh,
anything. You know,
yeah.
it's hours
A
of
lot of people
stuff,
have
and
pro
then
It's
a
a
lot of pe a lot of
it's a
people
whole
have pro
week.
a lot of people have producers and other people to do that stuff for them. Like
yeah, I
yeah,
know
yeah.
those
Assistants
people.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there are
producer that I
those,
mean,
sadly.
and I mean, we'll get into it later, but different generations or different um, classes of people view work very differently, or they view the worth of work very differently. And I think we'll get into this later on, but work is kind of relative, really, to kind of your specific experiences. What you can't say one job is better than another or more worthwhile or considered quote unquote work, and that's not work. You know what I mean? There's this whole generational gap that I think exists when it comes to that
I can see it in
mindset.
Kat's face. She wants to keep going with this.
Yeah, but we got
I'm
It's
not
like,
gonna
there's
interrupt.
so much to
I'm not
talk
gonna
about.
interrupt.
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't
well,
want to hear it.
And a class thing. There's a class thing
Mhm.
as well,
yeah,
which kind of led to me doing my podcast.
most
So it
definitely.
is kind of related.
It
So yeah,
is.
I'll save that though.
Yeah, I know.
Mm.
I was
Yeah.
like,
Save
Andrew, we're
that for a
skipping to
minute.
the end. We need to
Well,
I want to talk about
that
a
yeah,
couple
that
other things
often
first.
happens. Well, what happens is something will be brought up, and I'll be like, I gotta comment on it because I won't remember when the time is actually relevant to do it. I
Yeah,
just gotta get it out now.
yeah.
But I think we should talk about, I guess, another piece of work that you've worked on diligently with many others, and that is the documentary about Jean Rollin. Um,
Yes.
this is
Orchestrator of Storms.
yes, Orchestrator
Hmm.
of Storms.
The
Um,
fantastic
and
world of Jean Rollin.
Yeah, the Fantastique world,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
it was
Yeah.
an interesting distinction because I didn't realize that Fantastique is a genre in and of itself. Learned that from this documentary.
Yeah.
For
It
the
was important to
Yeah.
make that distinction as well. So it's good that that came over because I think that's where a lot of the misunderstanding comes in his work. It's an expectation, oh, vampires, it's just horror. And then the films aren't that, they're from a totally different genre. And I think once you understand that genre, they totally make sense within that genre.
Yeah.
So it's good that that's getting out there because I think, I don't know, I hope it's giving more of an appreciation for his work.
Well, for me, I'm somebody that's pretty much unknowing of his work. Going into your documentary is kind of my first avenue into his stuff. And to me, it doesn't bother me to see things about the movies before I watch the full movies because honestly, I have to see them in the context that the full movie presents them anyway. So me watching that documentary and seeing clips from tons of his films and them the people talking about the films and it's like that doesn't bother me. It just made me more excited to check him out
Mm.
because now I'm seeing some of the best parts of all the stuff that he's done, and
and and to be
yeah,
honest, it didn't really spoil the plots of any of those films that it did show clips from. Um,
Yeah, they're not really
yeah,
spoiler films you can spoil, but I think it's great that even in this day and age, a lot of us came to Roland, as people say in the documentary, through seeing pictures of his films.
mm,
Or to me, they had a documentary on Channel 4 here with clips of his films by Pete Toombs, who does Mondo Macabro, which was part of this whole series called Erotica that they put out, and they covered Paul Nashi, they covered Roland, they did a Jose Larraz one. So it's interesting that people now are still meeting John in that way. But it was the same for me. It's like, where do you see these films? They're so
yeah,
like, it's one of those, I think, where just the images are just so perfect. You need to see everything he's done.
yeah. He's a visual stylist that I just his visuals alone makes me super interested, and of course his how he worked his way up
mhm,
in the industry was also when you can hear the story of how a director um, makes his way in and his journey, seeing how he struggled and that stuff lends a lot more context and makes you it made me endear myself to him without even really seeing any of his movies yet.
right.
So
The,
now I'm
the
invested just because of the person that I learned about, and that's
Oh
great.
yeah, the documentary. I think for the most part, I don't know if this was its intention, really painted a portrait of the person himself, more so than the work did go hand in hand, but it really painted a portrait of him and his place within the history of not only the fantastique genre, but I think just French cinema in general and just cinema in general. And it really painted a portrait of a hidden gem, really, because I know just going into it myself, similar to Steven, I only really heard about him in the last month or so. And of course, leading up to this episode here, I was able to watch several of his movies. For those of you interested in knowing more about Jean Rollin and watching his movies, they are I was surprised at how available they actually are right now.
Oh,
Um,
they've been out there for years
yeah,
on Blu-ray.
yeah,
So
I
this
didn't
is the
realize
thing, I don't
that.
yeah, Kino and Redemption, we had Nigel Wingrove in the film. Thanks to Nigel, we got them on VHS, and then he licensed them out to Kino, put them out on, I think, on DVD and then Blu-ray. So they've been around. Those Blu-rays came out maybe more than 10 years ago
Yeah,
now.
I was looking.
So, yeah.
They came out around 2012, 2013, which is, yeah,
Yeah.
over a decade ago. I didn't realize that, and even, for those of you out there, who prefer to stream things or have access to streaming, they're available in several places. I know.
They were on Netflix like 10 years
Wow.
ago.
Wow.
On American Netflix, because I remember I got VPN and then looked at the American Netflix and I was like, "Oh my god, they got so much better stuff than we have." You
It's
even have
probably the
Rollin on
opposite
there.
now.
Yeah, I was saying I think it's the
Yeah, it's
opposite
probably the
now,
opposite now.
unfortunately. Um, yeah, I know just off the top of my head for those of you listening, the Criterion Channel has 2 of his films on there. I believe they have
That surprised me.
yeah, that surprised me
That
as well. I
did
think they have
surprise me.
I think they have Fascination and Living Dead Girl, I'm pretty sure are the 2 that are on there. I know a lot was available to stream through my local library system. Local
Oh,
library systems
wow.
here have a streaming app called Canopy, and then there's another one that a lot of other libraries do too, but my local library system had a ton of them, uh, able to stream through there, like, what did I end up watching? Like The Grapes of Death and stuff like that, and what's fascinating is, I know Arrow, who also produced the documentary, also has few of his films streaming on their,
Most of them, yeah,
Arrow
they're streaming
player.
most of them, I think. They've done 3 seasons. I don't know if they're all still on there, I think they are, but they staggered it into 3 seasons because there's quite a few films in there, so, yeah, it's quite a lot on Arrow, if you've got the Arrow channel.
Yeah, it's
But, yeah, they have been available for a while, so it's strange
well,
that,
I think it's an education thing,
yeah.
and
Mm,
we're me and Andrew are 2 people that are totally, okay with telling people that we don't know something. Yeah,
right.
because we're not educators. We're not we our education's through watching films, and we just never got to that part of film to be able to have anything to say about it. So this is what's great about physical media. It's what's great about everything that's, you know, kind of the way a lot of this stuff set up and stuff now is that we're learning so much. And for I think for maybe me, I can't speak for Andrew, but with French cinema, I think a lot of what I have learned uh, usually delves into, of course, the French New Wave. That
Yeah, please don't start
the
me on the
Yeah, I
new
know,
wave.
I know all that. But
I
even
do wanna bring it up
well,
though,
not
but
even
in a
that.
second.
No,
Let
don't get me to talk
No,
about
no,
Godard.
it just
I know.
within the context of Jean Rollin.
But and the thing is, I'm not really a Godard fan, so I'm not going to sit here and say I like him. But like,
Right.
but even just like French noir is the other kind of sector of French cinema that I've only really
Yeah.
explored. So I never got around to exploring Jean Rollin. So um, can you explain maybe when did you first discover Jean Rollin?
Well, obviously through that program, but I think I was talking to someone about this on another podcast the other day because we had the video nasties here in the UK and I grew up through that. So my formative years, my sort of mid-teen years, were all around the nasties, and there was quite a lot of Eurocult directors, the more visceral ones on that list, like Fulci
Mm,
was on there. There was a lot of cannibal films. So I sort of did it ass backwards. I watched them all, but I watched them all sort of, I guess, the more violent films like Ferox, Cannibal Holocaust, Zombie Flesh Eaters. But then that set up a relationship with me in European cinema. And then through the 90s, I think largely because of Channel 4 here, but also there were tape traders and that. But mainly Channel 4 showed a lot of this stuff. They showed stuff that was banned. I don't know how they got away with it. They apparently showed Flesh for Frankenstein in 3D in the early 90s. I
mm,
missed that, but they showed some crazy stuff. And then the early 2000s, it got easier to get stuff. And then things like grey area communities on the internet took off. So it was really that. It was this weird thing of just wanting to see Evil Dead and then getting into video nasties and then finding people like Jess Franco
mm.
off the back of that, because I was already used to watching films that were dubbed. I was already used to watching crazy Italian giallo films.
Yeah.
And so I was really open minded because I was only in my early to mid 20s then when when things really took off. The 90s was a really exciting time. Before that, it was so hard to get anything though in the UK. Like it was super hard to get things, and it would have to come through a friend of a friend of a friend and get.
Yeah.
So you'd often hear about things and you couldn't see them. But the 90s was such a great era. I was thinking about it the other day, and for J horror as well, because that's when the J horror boom started at the end of that as well, and the Tartan releases, which I would just blind buy. So it was like the opening of the floodgates. We had early Anchor Bay then as well. So yeah, I think that was the beginnings of what we have now with the more boutique thing. It started with people like companies like Tartan, Anchor Bay, who were bringing in weird cinema, who were bringing in cinema that we couldn't see before. But it was a real. But then compared to now, where you can almost like you can go to the library now and see John Rollin, that's just blown my mind. That has just blown my mind. But still, people complain. Still, people say, "Oh," and it's like, no, I wouldn't change it for the world. I think it's great.
Yeah, access is the best thing. I mean, that's the best thing about how everything is set up
Mm,
now. It's just about having that mind, having that patience and that mind to explore, wanting to explore. And that's what I think people are losing that, need to want to, like, they don't want to explore. They want the thing that they like to come to them. And that's,
Mm.
yeah.
and then that's going into some of your new podcast a little bit too. I know we're crossing the
Yeah.
streams here.
Yeah, you blaming me for
I
going
know.
But
there.
it's all
Damn.
linked to class, though, because the
Yes.
video nasties and all that stuff was also very linked. I mean, we were all on the dole. None of us worked.
Yeah.
We were just these unemployed punks, so we would get our gyro, go and get stoned and watch some band tapes. We had nothing else to do. We had no job to go to. A lot of my watching was informed by my class
Yeah.
because I didn't go to the cinema didn't go to the cinema that much because even though it was cheaper then, it was still quite expensive. It was all home video. It was all bootlegs or rental, and then TV, and then cable TV because I was a single parent with young children, so I couldn't go out. And people are like, "How have you seen so many films?" Well, I've spent most of my life stuck in, skinned.
Yeah.
But you get the whole world, at your fingertips if you want to dig for it. So it does interest me when people are like, they don't have that urge. But then I've always had that urge. It's just even now I'm still discovering new things all the time. And
Yeah.
I'm waiting for that next rabbit hole, that next new favorite director or new favorite subgenre that I didn't know about. And it's the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
Best thing in the world.
Yeah, I think sometimes people, they get so consumed with the things that they have been fed like early on in life, and they think they get to a point. And this happened to me. And this happened to me early on. This happened to me when I started to really become friends with Andrew here. Is that I got to a point where I didn't like. I was only watching a lot of mainstream stuff, and then he kind of started introducing me to some of the boutique stuff, and I was discovering new movies and new realms of cinema that I had, and I'm like, now I know that I will never be bored ever again in my life. Like so
Yeah.
much, there's so much to discover that we're going to continue to discover that it's never going to end, and the history just keeps getting longer and longer.
Yeah.
It's going to keep growing. So
Cinema is so deep and so vast and so endless, and it's kind of like time. It's constantly growing.
Mm.
Um, it's growing ever forward in any way it can, but also I think these treasure troves from the past keep getting unearthed. You know what I mean? Due to
it's about perspective
accessibility.
changes. It's perspective changes too. People
Yeah.
Very
are
true. Cultural
reevaluating
changes.
things that they just threw
Yeah.
away
And
before.
new generations keep discovering things from the past, you know what I mean? There seems to be these retro trends that keep recurring over and over again as the new generations go on. There was a whole 80s, kick a couple of years ago and then of course the mainstream picked up on it. It's like, oh, let's make everything 80s now. And then now the 90s are starting to become the retro era. So now they want to make everything 90s, and
Yeah, I saw something the other day. I was watching a program and they were talking about the 90s like it was years ago, and then I was like, "No, it wasn't." Then I was like, "Hang on a minute, it was 30 years ago, actually."
Ah,
yeah.
Jesus.
It's
And it's like,
depressing.
Yeah.
dang, it's like,
This
damn.
can't be retro. Go to the 60s. That's retro.
That's how I think too. I'm thinking about that's really a long time ago is when we're talking about the 60s and the 70s, but now it's like
I hear some things where like we're close, like certain, like we're further removed from certain dates than other dates. I can't remember what the comparison was the other day. But it's so incredible how where we are in time now as opposed to where we were. 30 years ago, 30 years before that was the 70s, and now 30 years ago now is the 90s, and it's just incredible how in less than 7 years time 30 years will be 2000. So it's just incredible the way this
It's
time is moving.
depressing. It's depressing.
It is
My
also
my
like
eldest
depressing as
son was
well.
well,
31.
yeah.
My eldest son was 31 last the beginning of the month, and I'm just like, "How can that even be? You
Mm.
can't be 31."
I don't remember what you did when you were 20. What did you do when you were 20?
Yeah,
Uh,
weren't you just one a day ago?
but but I do want
And
to
talk about oh
I do
yeah,
want to bring up with the documentary. This I believe this was your first directing credit, right? When it comes to like directing a
Yeah.
full length thing, how was that experience directing a documentary? And I have to say, beautiful. Like the visuals of this documentary are a lot of what really brought me into it because, of course, Jean Rollins images and things of his films are already you know beautiful as they are, but like then all that what you guys did with the visuals to tell the story of his life really just brings you
yeah.
in.
The structuring of the documentary is
Yeah.
what I thought was phenomenal. Kept me constantly engaged throughout the 2 hour runtime.
That's
It,
great to
it
hear.
just enthralling, really, and you told a narrative, the meshing of Jean Rollin as a person as well as his work and his life, all of those things, the balance in there was very
Yeah.
just exquisitely well done.
Yeah, because it started as a smaller extra. I just pitched to Arrow when I found out they were gonna be streaming. "Oh, do you" 'cause me and Dima have worked together for years and also at Diabolite magazine. And we've made quite a few extra features for analysts actually on Hammer Films. Then we made a feature length film on Michael Reeves for them, which sadly you could only get it on their Sorcerer's disc. So I pitched to Francesco at Arrow, like, "Hey, do you want to?" It was just going to be some small thing, but me being me and Dima being Dima, it just spiraled, especially after I talked to Nigel Wingrove for about 3 hours and then got Roland's son's email, and it just, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And
Yeah.
I just had to keep going back, going, "Look, we've added all this extra stuff and we need to keep going." So we missed our first deadline. But as for I didn't actually have anything to do with most of the visual stuff.
Oh,
That
okay.
was on Dima. He did all the editing. But we worked together. So we just have this weird partnership. We both want to be in charge. We're both really opinionated. We had Jonathan Zaurin, who's one of our cinematographers, but he was also a producer on the film. He was like our Kirk Hammett, and we were like out of Metallica. He was
Yeah.
just like the in the middle.
Yeah.
But somehow it always turns out okay, like all the creative art, and we had so many creative arguments.
Yeah.
So what's mine and what's his, it's like indistinguishable really. It just becomes this one thing. But it did keep getting longer and longer. And then we were like, oh my God, is it too long? I mean, the first cut was even longer than
Oh, wow.
we got so much extra stuff that we had to hold back, like hours of interviews. So that was one of the biggest challenges, was looking at like 12 hours of interviews or whatever and saying, right, what do we put in? What do we leave? And it was all good. So that was really difficult. It was all
Hey,
good.
that just means that the physical media release will have a lot of extras. Come on now, Kat, is there going to be a physical media release? Do we know anything about that?
Arrow saying yes, but I don't have any other details on
Gotcha.
that yet. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, I hope it happens. I really
Well,
would love
I
to see
hope
that.
it, because I want it, but
Yeah, I want it. Yeah.
but I do want it. And just, yeah, the sheer construction of it all is so well done. The one thing that I brought it up earlier, I guess I'll just force it in now. What I loved about it specifically was um putting Jean Rollin, firmly in a spot within history, specifically within French cinema history, right off the bat early on. Obviously, going through a lot of his background and a lot of
Mm,
his inspirations as well as stuff like that, but really getting into when his career first started in the late 1960s, coming towards the tail end of that French New Wave era. This is when I was getting back to the French New Wave, and what I found so fascinating about when he, arrived on the scene is that, the French New Wave was supposed to kind of be like, the counterculture of the cinema of the time, new, fresh, all that kind of stuff. And then his work is kind of like the counterculture of the counterculture because it's so
yeah,
different than the French
yeah.
New Wave in every way imaginable. And I just thought like him arriving at that time was just unique, and that was kind of my connection to the new wave part of it all. And his films, within the fantastique genre, for those of you listening who don't know it, can obviously look it up on Wikipedia like I did, and it's a mesh of different things. It's a mesh of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, but also
Mm,
surrealism. And what an interesting approach to cinema at that time. Just incredibly unique, and in a way, that is kind of also the reason why he was probably not as appreciated, at that time as he is now. Um, did you find that, you know, that there's been a very high reappraisal of his work, more so now after so many years that his work's been available, after so many years of his passing? Do you feel like there's been a lot of like reappraisal of his work and he's more appreciated now than before?
I think I think it's growing. I don't think we're quite there, but I've had so much feedback on the documentary, which has been amazing. Um, I think it's just giving that, not to sound like a pretentious asshole, but to give that framework, to give that context to people, because he really was on his own. We say he was singular quite a few times in the documentary. He really was singular. And so it can be confusing if you're not really in that space, if you're not really even into Eurocult. Like, he's embraced in Eurocult, but then you've got all sorts of sorry, all sorts of surrealist filmmakers within that. Even Jess Franco can be quite surreal at times, even though he was slightly more, not necessarily commercial, but yeah. So to see people that who've not really been interested in that before come along, I think now the setup is there, because I had that watching the Erotica series. So it was a shorter episode, obviously, but it was really important for us to set the scene. You know, this wasn't just some. I think there's this idea, oh, he was just a porn maker, or he just like looking at women's tits, blah blah blah. Oh, that's very lowbrow, and you'll start me off on another one of my. I
Mm.
don't believe in high and low.
Yeah.
Go back to your point about the new wave. I think my issue with the new wave was certain filmmakers. Well, I love Chabrol, but then he just ripped the shit out of the middle classes consistently. And I love Roger Vadim. They wouldn't even let Vadim in. They're like, no, you can't come in. But by 68, Godard was, I mean, he was a Maoist by then. He was so far up his own backside, and this was someone who came from a lot of money. It was all about, oh, it has to be realism, it has to be political, it
Yeah.
has to be this, it has to be that, and it was very self-indulgent, it was very bourgeois,
Yeah.
you know. And so what Roland did was kind of like punk rock, really. It's
Yeah.
in the spirit of that. He just wasn't interested in making these big political statements, even though you can find vague politics in some of his films. There's a lot of gender politics, but in something like The Nude Vampire, where you've got the vampire anarchists and stuff against the capitalists, you know. But he didn't do it their way. He didn't do it by 68. Godard and Truffaut were the establishment. You know, they were the establishment. So even though they're protesting for the workers, they're still the establishment in France. And Roland really suffered because of that. He really suffered his whole career. Even now in France, he's not respected at all,
Yeah.
which is, yeah, it is. If he'd come from Britain, you know, well, the British love to celebrate Hammer and James Bond because they're like, look, these are our things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
I was gonna say,
I was
yeah.
gonna say there's
Okay.
something about, like you were saying with the French New Wave, the filmmakers coming, Truffaut and Godard and people like that. There was this sense of self seriousness and being that they were critics, or people that were in, very educated in the cinema that came before them. They that's how everything was really just all self serious like that, and I think that that's what's great about Roland's place is that he looked at making films more like for fun, like it was fun, like
Yeah, it was fantasy. It
yeah,
was irrelevant. It was for enjoyment.
yeah,
And, you know, I mean, by 68, they'd already, I mean, Chabrol was the first, but he quickly went into commercial cinema. And by 64, Cahiers du Cinema, where Chabrol had also started with that whole little gang, are writing articles about how terrible he is because he sold out. But Chabrol's films are a lot more interesting. But oh my god, they were made for the commercial.
yeah,
And not to go on too much of a rant, you know, because I do like a lot of intellectual cinema, but
of
I
course,
think if you say that the only art has to be intellectual cinema, you can't have commercial cinema, you can't have something like sexploitation or an exploitation film can't also be considered art in some way. I don't even want to have a discussion with a person like that
Mm.
because I think that whole idea of the auteur has now become gatekeeping. And
mhm,
I think the whole new wave was all about gatekeeping. You know, they Roland and some of the people that worked with him as well, they were gate kept out of the industry where they were offering something new. There's so few films that cover the fantastique, and it's such a beautiful genre, but there are so few films that you can actually say this is a truly fantastic film. Harry Kummel's Daughters of Darkness is another one. I'd say that was fantastic rather than a traditional vampire film. And of course, Kummel's from Belgium, so they've got a similar tradition there. But yeah, it's just to see people now embrace him. I think maybe because they've been given permission, or I don't know.
well,
People aren't going to think they're watching porn. I don't
well, the
know.
gatekeeping thing is that
We bring that up a lot.
we bring that up a lot, and it also it's this just plays more and more into our kind of main subject matter here later on in the podcast is that you know you know there's a political element to film. I mean, it's always whether you want to try to stay away from it or not. Whether the film itself's got political stances in it or the suppressing of cinema and trying to say what's high art or what's worth watching. That's
Oh
political
yeah.
in itself. Just censoring
Mm.
something.
It's
That's
often it's often the context around a film is when all of these extra things kind of come up, like the politics and cultural relevance and all kinds of stuff like that. And the stance that I've always taken, I've said this probably a million times on the podcast here, is that I don't like the suppression of artistic expression or the oppression of really any type of, expression, whether it be, politics or whatever the case may be. But specifically when it comes to cinema, cinema can be so many different things. It can be everything really. And when you get to the point where you're trying to put things in a box or put things in a certain category or saying, "Oh, it can only be this or it should only be this." It's like you're selling it short and you're killing the art form of it. You're killing its form of expression. And I think, as Kat has said, Jean Rollin, I think was his work has been put in a box, I think, for so long, where like it is only exploitation. It is only vampire films with nudity and graphic violence in it, when in fact it is so much more than that. And there was one person who was interviewed, I can't remember who it was, but the way in which they described it was very simple yet so profound, where he said where I think it was a he, I can't remember who it was, where they said that Jean Rollins films are kind of like their dreams and memories, and that's the vibe they give off, because they have a touch of the surreal in them, but they're also placed within reality, but they feel like dreams and they feel like memories. And what's so unique about it is all of these supernatural and horrific things are happening in the movies, and you don't get the reaction from the people within the films that you would expect. So it
Yeah,
feels so surreal. Like, it feels like, oh yeah, I've stumbled upon a castle in the middle of the woods and there are two vampires here. Yeah, because that's just the way the world
That's how
is.
it
When
is.
in reality, that's not the case. But in the Jean Rollin world, this is quote unquote normal to a certain
yeah.
extent. And that's so unique about that. So it's so much more than, the horror genre at the time, the 1970s, when we started getting slasher films. And then into the 80s, we got even more slasher films here in the US, which became super popular and has kind of overtaken maybe the more artistic merits of the genre that I think the Fantastique really offered at the time. And like you said, there's so limited of it because it wasn't a commercial thing. And of course, studios still
Yeah,
to this day want to
it
make money.
crops up quite a lot in. I mean, if you think, a lot of Eurocult was made purely as commercial film. So you've got John Roland, Jose Larraz, Jess Franco, obviously Severin have been fighting the Franco fight for years,
Yeah,
upgrading and doing this stuff. But all of those guys and all of that little corner of weird sort of I wouldn't even say it was exploit. What is exploitation? That label gets put on so much, and as if to say, well, that's trash. And then you quite often find there's so much more to all of those films. I can think of very few films, Lee Frost's Love Camp probably being one of the truest exploitation films, as one such a mean-spirited film. But most of the others, there's much more to them. It's this label though, isn't it? It's like, oh well, that was just cheap trash made for money. Whereas these filmmakers, they still had their own vision. They weren't, obviously, I think art holes don't like to admit film is a business, though, at the end of the day. It started at a business as a business, and it will always be a business. And if you try and make a film, you spend most of the time talking about money. It's not just a case of having the privilege to do whatever you want. It's a business. It is a business at the end of the day. Don't like business talk in talk of art, but it is. It was designed as a business. It came out of a commercial need. It started in, circus tents and stuff for working class people.
yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. Does that mean it's not art? I don't agree with that.
No,
But you can go and see Banksy and
yeah,
pay 10 million for one, but that's okay because that's like serious art. The art world isn't. Of course, the art world's painting now
exactly.
is totally about money. But yeah, we can't talk about that.
Well, I think it's a conversation we've had a couple times. I think on this show is that there is an interesting synchronicity to that idea of art standing alone and business being on the other side. It's like one feeds into the other because a lot of great art, most art is all funneled through, like you said, it's always about money. That the limitations that are put on something can also create great things as well. Um,
Exactly, and that was
yeah,
the case with Rollin. I think somebody asked me in an interview if he'd had more money, do you think, how do you think his films would have been? Well, they would have still been Rollin's, but I would have liked him to have made more films. And most heartbreaking thing when researching the documentary was finding out all the films that he couldn't make, like his Bathory film, for crying out loud, his werewolf film with Brigitte LaHaye in it. It's like, but, other than that, I don't know whether it would have changed anything, what it would have made him more respectable. I think film is always a series of compromises and challenges because unlike writing a novel or sitting down and doing a painting, you need money to make a film. Like, you don't make a film on your own. Like, even the documentary, as small as it was, there were so many people involved, like so many people behind the scenes, and it worked because of all those people. We didn't have a huge budget for it, and everybody kind of over delivered because they really believed in the project. So it's not even just our film, it's everyone's, like everyone's film, because we couldn't have done it without anybody, like even the people that are just thanked but weren't in it. Loads of help behind the scenes. So people forget that and they say, we don't want to talk about money, but you can't make a film without money.
yeah. Film is a combination of all different art forms, and it's got the most weight behind it to get it kind of done in a way that I think is pleasing for everybody. And so yeah, there's a reason why it's one of our biggest art forms that's on the biggest scale as it is, because it
Mm,
has got so much. It's got so much behind it that it's an impressive thing, as people always say. It's so hard to just get something done. To get a movie made is a miracle. Because
it's
it is,
hard work.
yeah,
Well, it is. It's a lot of work. And I think people don't appreciate that. They don't appreciate how difficult it is to make films. And so you often see people saying, oh, well, it didn't have a very large budget, or not our film, but just in general, they'll complain about this. And they don't think there was probably a whole team of people behind that,
yeah,
working for, God knows how many hours a day trying to get that thing done. They don't appreciate. I think people just assume films appear. They
yeah.
just appear,
Or that they're
like fully
they're
formed.
created in the computer, like by one person or two people. Like,
Yeah, no, it takes
it's
an army of creators, really. And I think we've learned now, specifically when it comes to large productions, like super large budgeted 100, $200 million productions, that there's like hundreds and hundreds of people who work on this. And we've learned just the strains of the nuts and bolts people that it takes to like pull these things off, and then they get criticized for it. And it's like, these people working, you know overtime, hundreds of hours of work.
that's a whole thing other thing we can go into
Yeah,
about how people
I know.
don't get paid enough to do the things that
Yeah,
are like the
absolutely.
most, like
Specifically, there
visual
was a
effects people
I
don't
was
get
just gonna
paid.
say that the visual
Yeah,
effects
yeah.
Yeah,
people.
but you're supposed to, enjoy doing that. It's supposed to
It's
be.
True.
you like it, so you should just shut up. That comes back into
See, this
our
is
more of our
why I
debate.
hate yeah, this is why I hate this idea that film isn't commercial, or writing about film isn't commercial, it's not a job, because it is all work.
Yeah.
And when you just say it's art, then you're expected to do it for not very much because it's art.
Oh,
And my dad is a musician. He's in his mid-70s now and he still plays.
That's great.
But, as I was growing up, he worked in a factory in the day and then he went out and played gigs at night, and he could earn money doing weddings, playing in bars, But he said it's harder and harder now to get paid as a musician. He still goes out and plays just because he likes to go out and play. But he said, you could go and play at a bar, have a fun day and a barbecue. The guy manning the barbecue will be paid, the bar manager will be paid, the bar staff will be paid, the band will be working for hot dogs. And so you have to remember it's all work. You can't just say, oh, it's because once it becomes purely art, then people expect you to just do it for nothing. And I,
Especially
yeah,
within the entertainment industry, to use another kind of umbrella term. I follow
mm,
for some reason over the years, I followed many like freelance workers when it comes to like freelance writers, freelance, other workers and whatnot. And they're always talking about how difficult it is not only to get work, but to get work that pays significant
yeah, it's
amounts.
hard.
Like, especially, I mean, we're transitioning now kind of, a little bit into what your podcast is about, the whole working class people, blue collar people, and whatnot. And, people kind of, our economic situations keep rapidly changing all of the time, usually for the worst. And there's not, and there a lot of freelance people who don't have steady work suffer
No.
greatly because of that, because their work is so unreliable, so unpredictable. Their financial situations are, and it's interesting how generationally that seems to be a consistent problem. Is things like that. Um,
I think it's all jobs now, though, not even just freelance jobs. I mean,
mhm,
I worked in the cleaning industry for years, and now a lot of cleaning jobs they're all minimum wage. They're 0 hours contracts. They're on these short contracts. You don't get all the benefit. Well, not benefits, but the fixed hours even now. And there's this argument, well, you should just go and get a proper job. Well, I did a proper job for years and years and years. I worked as a cleaner for years. I worked as a cleaning supervisor. And 10 years ago, um, because of my son, I had to stay at home and look after him, like care for him because he's on the autistic spectrum. It wasn't so hard. I mean, to go out and work then, I was going out in the middle of the night. I was going out, really early. And it's like I found something I could do that I was good at cleaning, but I sucked at almost everything else. Like every other job I tried. I tried working in an office, I sucked at it. I was actually good at it. So why can't you earn money doing that? But obviously the market, even in the last few years, is degraded with the commentary thing and that. You do have people coming in doing it for not very much money or undercutting or doing it for free. If I ever see anyone doing anything for free like that, I'm on them. And it's like, oh, well, I just wanted a way in. It's like, but it's free work. Like, this is
mm.
actually a product.
Yeah.
Okay, the profit margins aren't huge, but you should get paid for it.
Well,
Like,
I mean,
the, the very least.
yeah, a good example. Sorry to cut you off, Kat.
Mm.
Um, we don't do a lot of reviews for Blu-rays necessarily on our channel. Not that we have a huge ass audience that it matters anyway, but like we do some, but we don't really typically do a lot of reviews because we know that we're what we're doing is promoting for free the selling of something. And of course, we love this stuff, but it's like
Yeah.
why put in the work to do all this like thought, do all this homework, talk about something, record it, edit it, put it out there for nothing. Like, like any,
Yeah, it's hard. It's
it's
hard. I started off reviewing. I
yeah,
I start when I first started off film writing professionally, it was reviewing stuff,
yeah,
and I hated it anyway. I just hated it. I just thought, why am I doing
yeah,
this? And then there are certain publications, not anyone I write for, that will get you to write not honest reviews. There's a lot of stuff that
yeah,
goes on behind the scenes. And now they will just get people to a lot of places will just get people to review things for free discs. Like that would be the pay.
sure,
So
sure,
it's getting harder and harder and harder to actually make money doing it as a job. And I always treat it as a job. And then people are like, oh, well, is it not? We're not allowed to have it as a job then because film journalists used to be a job,
yeah.
like before the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, we have a scenario like that where we work with Imprint has been awesome enough to send us some review copies, and that's where
I love it.
there's an exchange there. You know, they're giving us
They're good.
something, and we're giving them something, and that's a great way to work. But we can't just spend a bunch of time. picking our favorite things and just doing them for free. We already talk about them every week anyway. We talk about
That's also we also already kind of do that
we
as
kind
you
of do it. We kind of do it, but we don't do it directly for the Blu-rays as they come out, because we talk about things before
before
they
they
come
come
out.
out.
You know,
Yeah,
we're
before they come
talking
out.
about more, in a sense, we're talking about the movies more than we're talking about the releases, because
Well, because
you
at
know,
that point, you know the movies more than you know what the actual
exactly.
product is, because the product, we don't have
But
it,
that's
you know?
what's
And it is about the films though as
there.
well. It is about the
The
films.
Exactly,
films are the core. I always say
it's
when
the
it comes to
core.
any of this, the
Exactly.
films are the core of it all. They're I think they're the most important decision when I think it comes to, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, when it comes to buying something or putting money towards something. I think the movie is the most important part of it for the most part. Obviously, the bells and whistles and the extras and all that kind of stuff does play a part in it, but I
Yeah,
think for me, I got to make, I want to maximize my value of, what I put the money towards, you know.
Yeah.
and that plays more of a factor, because because we have such a so many riches of, you got so many releases coming out now. There's sometimes going to be duplicates. There's going to be one label that puts out the
Oh,
same
all the
movie as another
time.
label. So now we got to start comparing features. We got to start
I
comparing.
always feel really guilty if I'm like, I know someone's already bought something,
Yeah,
and it's like, yeah, but I've done this thing, and I always feel really bad, and like I'm making
you
somebody. I'm not
shouldn't.
a very
You
good at
shouldn't,
business,
because
but
there's always going to be somebody that hasn't gotten that thing yet.
Well, it's
So
yeah,
yeah,
I'd never judge anyone though if they said they couldn't afford something, or well, I'd probably feel bad. That's what I think, but there is so much stuff now. When it first started up, it would be like, I don't know, 2 discs a month or something, but I tapped out of collecting years ago.
yeah.
I couldn't I There's no way I could afford it.
it's
I
only gotten, yeah, I would say it's only gotten more expensive. I would say as time goes on. And I will say this though, one of the more negative aspects I think of collecting physical media when it comes to movies is, for the most part, they really don't hold their value, because there's always right now, at least, there's always a newer edition, a new format
Yeah.
comes out, a new, bigger, brighter, shinier version of something comes out, and then the older thing, just the value plummets. Unfortunately,
but
Yeah.
that happens with anything related to technology,
it
televisions, Blu-ray
yeah.
players, computers, um, even things like automobiles.
I'm
It
hoping
just
we're getting
values
towards
goes
the
down.
end of that, though, because honestly, with the additions that are coming out with films now, they're so great that once we've done this pass on a lot of film history, we don't really need to re-release. For instance, Texas Chainsaw Massacre getting that nice 4K from Second Sight. I don't see us needing to get another one after
I
that.
know. I worked on that and I
I
can't
know
see it. I'm biased, but I can't see it being topped.
it can't. Just for me
I
not having it yet, just
just
looking at it, there's no way.
Yeah, that's gotta be the definitive release. It's
yeah.
and there've been so many films similar to that that just get that treatment over and over again, and it's like there's gotta be a definitive one on the horizon. Another issue is the rights keep changing hands every couple of years now, so everybody
Yeah.
wants to put out their version, and then their
Yeah.
version is gonna be different than the previous version, and then
And then at this point,
so
all
on.
they're leaning on is anniversaries. They're like, you
Oh,
know, you
every
want that
time.
50th anniversary. It's like,
It's
it's
getting to the point where I've been collecting so long that it goes from like 10 to 15 to 20, 25, and it's like oftentimes it's just the same disc in a different packaging,
yeah,
increasingly worse looking packaging. Coincidentally,
yeah.
it's
But
just
but
that's
but
just the way
but
it is.
but yeah. So the legacy of
Capitalism.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
capitalism. No,
capitalism can be good,
it
and I
can
say
be
that as a socialist because it gives us all the films. So
exactly,
Very
exactly.
true.
it
But
gives us all the films, and I'm just there for the films. So if the films are more available, I'm happy about that.
most definitely. And so leading into a little bit of talking about politics more. I do want to talk about what we, of course, I reached out to you about, which is that you have a new podcast. Um,
Mm.
that it seems to only be on Spotify right now. Is there any
No,
uh
it should be on iTunes
is it
as
on that?
well.
Is it? Okay.
And I
Ooh.
do have a website, but there's nothing on it at the moment. So
Okay.
I've only done 2 episodes. I need to get my stuff together on it. But I did start it on a bit of a whim. It's basically my pressure valve.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
No, I can tell.
that's
I
what
can
it
tell.
is.
I can tell.
Oh, very
I
much
can
so.
tell.
It's very, very self-expressive. Very much
Definitely,
so.
and that's why I love it so much. But because I think if you're a fan of Cat, this is where you're going to get kind of the even more um, uncensored Kat Ellinger really
Yeah.
speaking her mind on things that I think, not even if it's not film oriented, as we've discussed through this whole thing, politics are inherent in even our films that we love, and even if we're not realizing that they are political at all, they're there. And I think
Mm,
uh, Kat's voice uh, is she's got a really unique voice when it comes to politics. She has a very personal relationship that makes her opinion very much, you know, educated and knowledgeable from her own life to really speak on the working class. And I haven't said it yet. The name of her new podcast, her podcast is The Working Class Feminist. So and she has done 2
Yeah, 2
episodes.
things that people think don't exist.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
don't be
yeah.
when I looked at the name, I couldn't find anything, like, apart from a few Guardian articles where middle class women were talking about working class women. So, it was like, now is the time, because some of us are working class and feminist, you know, and it was really the culture war that drove me to it, though, and a lot of and obviously working in an overtly middle class industry and just seeing so much classism and just seeing so much stuff.
Mhm.
But my film work, because my degree is in social sciences, it's not in film. So, you know, I often view films as not just as a historical document, but a cultural document.
Yes.
I think films, any genre, but especially comedy and horror, tell us a lot about a society, even if it's in a more abstract way. They tell us a lot about society, the fears of that society, the anxieties, the social standards, and so that's often my approach to film criticism, has been that. But it just got more and more that and more. And then I did the Miklos Jan show commentaries. Was it that this time last year? And ended up ranting about Goddard on there and Can 68. And it was just getting to a point I was thinking, I can't contain this anymore. I have to find another home for it, or an adjacent home, I guess, because feminism's very important to me, but so is politics. And quite often I'll rant on Facebook, and I know everyone's like, just shut up, Cat, because I'm like, class war, working class. But it's like, I have to find somewhere to put that, or I'm going to go mad, because I don't see anyone, a few people, Darren McGarvey, who's a cultural commentator in the UK, he's Scottish, wrote a book called Poverty Safari, and another one called The Social Distance Between Us. And he writes from a perspective of coming from a very deprived area and everything. And he talks about class, and he talks about what class means in Britain. And so it was his work really that inspired me, because I just love him. So yeah, it all sort of come about to that. But I don't think, I see film people and they go, "Oh, I don't do politics." And it's like,
Mm.
how can you not do like, all life is political unless you've got loads of money, I
I was
guess.
gonna say, I think the problem with some people is they don't really, I don't think they really understand what politics means.
mm.
I
They're
don't
not
think
aware
their
of
their
how
their their their
prevalent
their
it is.
their view of what politics means is maybe a few different subject matters that they hear celebrities talk about all the time on the
Yeah, it's
award shows, or
yeah,
their view of politics is very narrow-minded, when politics is really all about how we live our lives every day, and we have to live in a
Yeah,
society that tries to keep things in a certain way. Anything
structure. Yeah,
in that spectrum can be political, because we all are different people trying to live in the same society, but we all are different, and we're trying to all be told to do the same things all the time, which can create
exactly.
branches of differing opinions and differing, that's the problem. Is I think people's minds are just not, they think they're not political minded, but ask them the right question and they'll have some shit to say.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
they'll have an opinion on it, or they'll be complaining about their job or their wages or this or that. And it's
Exactly.
like, you are political.
Yes.
That is politics. All of it is
oh yeah.
politics.
Especially now, the the spectrum of politics is everywhere, like Stephen was just saying, and the lines don't really exist anymore. It's not the politics aren't dealing with these grandiose ideas like taxes and all this kind of stuff. It's gotten down to a very
Yeah, that's part
personal
of my
level.
problem.
Yeah.
That is part of my frustration, and I guess I held back for a while because I am left wing. I'm a democratic socialist. I want a return to what I consider British values around the welfare state and social services and nationalisation. I don't want all out socialism. I think some capitalism can be good, but not what we've got now, not this sheer, unregulated,
Mm,
God knows what it is. But I think the problem with social media is it's become very about this idea of identity and the personal on both sides, on the left and the right. And all I see are middle class people on the left, and they're constantly talking about identity and misquoting academic theory and God knows what. Like a good example was Mark Hamill accidentally liked a tweet by J.K. Rowling, and then everyone wanted to cancel Luke Skywalker. And it's like if just a tenth for those people could get as mad about child poverty or what Jeff Bezos is doing or the treatment of like
Yeah.
anything, we'd have a chance. But I think it has become, I don't know, it's I'm not saying that identity doesn't matter, but I think I'll say it again, and I'm sure it's problematic to say this, the only privilege in this world is economic privilege.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some groups of people are going to find it harder to get that economic privilege, but I feel like the working classes have been left out of all these diversity discussions and these in a way that the working class are out there now. Oh, well, they're okay. Um, we just ignore them. They're stupid. They're thick. And I've never seen so much of this in my life until the last several years. I think being around so many middle class people. After Brexit, I voted to stay in the EU. I understand why a lot of working class people voted against that. Like, I'm not saying I agree with them, but I understand why. If you can't afford to travel down the road, you're not thinking about your freedom of movement or whatever. All they saw was shut the country down and we'll get more pie. So all I saw in the wake of that was a lot of media people that I'm associated with talking about how someone needed to educate the working class and how they were all thick and race. Never seen so much classism in my life. And at a time where we can't even roll doll books, and I say this as a fat person, can't write the word fat, right? But it's still fine to be absolutely classist because I think it's dissolved into this thing where people think class doesn't exist anymore. But I'm constantly aware of my class. I'm constantly aware that there is a difference. I've had actual classism in the work I do now, like actual classism. And, I would say worse than sexism,
Mm.
not because I'm a woman, but because I'm working class. I have certain peers in the UK treat me like a brat. They're like, why has this brat arrived? She didn't go to one guy. Can I name him? You're not going to.
You
He
said
wrote an essay that's on the internet. I take the piss out of him all the time. But Adrian Martin actually wrote an essay called I'm promoting his website now. He wrote an essay basically talking about cheap, low-brow audio commentaries and grouped me in with a bunch of other people and called us a fan trash cult and pointed out that we weren't really qualified because we don't go to these exclusive European film festivals like Rotterdam.
mm,
That's become the gift that keeps on giving. But it's this crap that you have to listen to. I call him the world's last cinephile now.
mm,
And it's like, that is classism. Not everyone can roll off to Rotterdam to watch some film, some marginal independent film, and
yeah,
then that no one else can ever get to see because it only ever plays there because of the distribution. That doesn't make you more educated or more intelligent just makes you richer than the majority of
Exactly.
Or
critics.
yeah, privileged, really. And, well, that's what comes
Very
with richness.
privileged.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have film critics who work and they go off, they pay to go off to Cannes every year, it's like a big jolly to them. They don't really get paid for what they do. And it's all about class. And the more that becomes normalized, the less we hear from working class voices. Although a lot of us tend to be shut into genre. If you'll notice most of the working class critics will be shut into horror most of the time. I had the cheek to try and get out of that though, and did.
Yeah.
Not that I don't love horror, but I was
Of
like, I
course.
don't just know about horror, I know about other things. And that's when I started to get problems.
Yeah.
That's when I had people saying to me, actual producers saying to me, Gloucestershire accent shouldn't be on audio commentaries. So winning that award the other day, I was like, fuck you,
Mm,
Yeah, I was
mm.
gonna say, do you see this Shelf Shock Award?
I know, seriously.
Obviously, you're wrong.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
so much, classism, and also, um, that even extends, I would even say now, like you were just mentioning film festivals and coveraging of film festivals. And I
Mm,
mentioned earlier, a lot of freelance people that I talk to are people who have certain, I'd say disabilities or things like that prevent them from being able to
yeah.
travel to certain film festivals, or they can't afford the plane tickets, the hotels, all those accommodations in and of itself. And one thing that happened during the height of COVID is a lot of the film festivals went digital, and
Which was great.
which
It
was
was the
great.
best thing ever. I'll give a shout out to Fantasia though. They always do remote coverage, and so they're the one that I usually cover. They have always been absolutely wonderful. But that year of the pandemic, I attended festivals that I could have never have gone to.
Yeah,
And then London Film Festival, the next year, start charging people to do that.
that's what I
There
was
was
just
a
gonna
fee.
say. They either
It's like,
changed.
how like, what?
Yeah,
We have to pay to review your films and promote your festival? Like, what the
yeah,
hell is
yeah,
that?
and then they took a lot of those digital access away, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you just opened up your festival to a gigantic bigger audience who's going to promote it on their social media. They're going to
Yeah,
write about it for different outlets. You're going to get more exposure than ever before, and they are paying ticket prices like people who attend in person, stuff like that. So you're going to make the more money, but then a lot of the festivals just took that option away, and it's like you just opened the door for so many people who didn't have access to it, just to shut it in their face again, to kind of go back
there were
to.
a lot of other critics, though, who go to those festivals who were kicking up a fuss about it.
That's
And
the
one guy
thing.
I
It's
remember
that
writing an
privilege.
essay, that, "Oh, well, I go to these other people shouldn't be allowed their eyes on these films because I
Exactly.
go there."
And
And
it's
I
like,
think it's a real problem that we have in this industry. And people would say, "Well, why does it matter?" Because it matters, because everything is political and you can't shut out an entire class of people. I didn't realize this till very, very recently because I generally tend to in my like I write about all sorts of films. But saying that in the films that I do cover professionally, it's largely more classic film. Not always, but largely. And then I did a commentary for Censor, which was the first time I think I'd ever done a commentary on like a brand new film. And I love the film, and obviously it's all about the video nasties period. But that's not what I saw in the film. I thought this is a female gothic film. It's been missold as some sort of video nasty. That was affecting the response to the film online. People thought they were getting this gory slasher. No one gets killed for a whole hour. It's like this wonderful sort of surreal female gothic film that's probably more influenced by Twin Peaks, and it was definitely influenced by Let's Scare Jessica to Death. And so I said on my commentary, if this film had been made sort of, 15 years ago, it would have been in Kayla Janice's House of a Psychotic Women book. And I think it is in the reprint, the new one that just came out. It's a House of Psychotic Women film. And after that, I saw people calling it that. And I thought this stuff does matter because it shapes the narrative
Mm,
around film. And that narrative then it has so much power to what gets greenlit, to what gets shown at theaters, at festivals, to how successful a film is or a release is. It does actually matter. So it might, on the surface, look like, wow, it's just people's opinions, but it actually shapes the narrative around film. And investors and distribution comes off the back of how they think they can market something.
yeah,
How, and obviously Censor was marketed with the video nasty thing, but it's not really about that. I felt that was a mismarketing. Obviously, it's a huge part of the plot. You got a censor who starts, but it set up an expectation that you were going to get something that was a homage to
yeah,
80s splatter films, and it wasn't. It was just this beautiful, surreal female gothic film, like perfect for me. So seeing that, I was like, this does actually matter. It actually matters what we say about these films. And so if you only allow these very privileged people, the two top film critics in the UK, Peter Bradshaw and Mark Kermode, both went to public schools, for crying out loud. And then he's writing about Titan for The Guardian. It's like, I don't want to hear some 70-year-old, sorry, Peter Bradshaw, but some 70-year-old guy who went to public schools opinion on a sort of Cronenberg type body horror, like,
yeah,
but that's how it is. We need more working class voices in here and more women. And obviously, I'm saying identity does matter to a certain extent. It just shouldn't be the key focus of everything. We should be looking at class, economic class. We should be looking at giving people opportunities to have a voice, and then often coming into it as well. When I first started, I had no confidence because people like me don't write about film. We don't talk about. I was just so, I'm a big mouth, really. But I spent like 5 years just so unsure of myself and scared to say the wrong thing, and really, I guess, like self conscious of my accent. And so I try and tone it down. I try and tone myself down. And that was all because of the way people were reacting to me as well. But I just didn't have that confidence. And yet I see people that come from that side and they're overconfident. They've all got that Dunning-Kruger's thing. They all think they're amazing and it's like really bland. So it's been a personal growth for me, I think, being in this industry and seeing how everything works. It became like a more of a personal growth of like, well, I came from like absolute shit. I was living on the streets at 15, like on the streets. I was sleeping in doorways and in
mm,
squats. And I had my son at 17. I got pregnant at 16. And I lived on the road and I lived in council houses for like on violent estates, like for most of my adult life, and worked in shit jobs. And, I'm not going to get driven out of something that I love by these people who've just been handed it.
yeah.
So I see the whole thing is connected.
It is.
I've always been interested in class, but it became like a massive burning issue when I was constantly being like either seeing classism or, just these attitudes or these very elitist people, the Goddard bros, as I call them.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Well,
I'm ranting
no,
there.
no, you're okay. That's as you say, your big mouth is why is good for podcasts. We need that. But I'm with you. I think you know we don't want one type of voice being what educates us on film or anything, and having different viewpoints from different backgrounds. It's one thing that I find is an issue in our society as a whole. Is that this wanting everybody, like it kind of comes back to the gatekeeping thing in a little bit, but like needing everybody to agree with everybody, when I think it's okay to talk about our differences, and acknowledge that we're different than other people, but it's about making people feel bad about being different. That's the problem. Like I think we need to enter. I think we need to be um, you know being celebrating people's differences, whether it's our race, our backgrounds of, I'm not saying that we should say, "Oh, I was poor, yay," but it's something about our
No,
past
but
that.
we should say that. Do you know what?
But
We
well,
should say that because this is the thing. We're supposed to feel ashamed, and I did feel ashamed for most of my life. I felt ashamed. There's nothing more shameful than being poor. I'm not
well,
not that rich
in my
now. I'm not
well, in
rich. I'm
my
just
society,
getting by. But yeah,
what I'm
we
saying
should
is, I
talk
grew up,
about it.
I grew up I would say I was in a lower class family. Like I grew up in a trailer park. We didn't have a lot, and I got picked on for living in a trailer park,
And this
and
is what I mean, and
yeah.
I still see that attitude now from people who were supposedly, you see them posting other kind of, I'm gonna use the woke word. I hate that word, and if you use it in a negative way, apparently you're right wing, which I'm not. But I just think it's ridiculous. These people that are supposedly woke, but then they'll be laughing at the Florida man, or here's
Mm,
a photo of someone from Walmart in cheap clothes. Let's laugh at them. Let's look, and it seems to be perfectly acceptable. Laugh at someone for being stupid. The amount of people that I know. I'm suck at French. I cover French films. I'm not French, right? Sometimes I mangle pronunciations, but
you're
I've
in the
had
right place then.
like
That's
colleagues,
Steven's specialty.
"Oh, you can't speak French." So what? Does that mean I can't the French critics pronounce Hitchcock like Eachcock? No one says, "Listen to him, he's not pronouncing it." It's only our lot that have to suddenly go into a weird French accent,
Yeah.
which I just so yeah, it is we should not have to feel ashamed of that.
Well, I'm not
I don't
ashamed
think
of.
we
I'm
should.
definitely not
Yeah,
ashamed of
but
it.
we
But
are
yeah,
still shamed for it though, that we're not quite, educated enough, or we're not, so therefore our opinions might not have as much validity.
yeah,
I'd much rather listen to somebody who hasn't been through a whole system of study and studied other writers and then form this opinion. I'd much rather listen to somebody who's not in that, their opinion on something, because it's going to be
well, I
interesting.
was gonna say it's gonna come
At
from a
least it's
place where they
different.
probably chose to do that thing instead of where just like
Yeah.
it filtered through something because of maybe their parents or maybe somebody around them controlling their pathway. But if it's somebody like you who chose, who went into social work, but then chose that film studies was kind of like watching more film and then talking about it on a level where it's become educational, on your
Yeah,
own.
which I never set
Yeah,
out to do that.
yeah,
I just started a blog. I got laid off from my job. I'd had
yeah.
a breakdown. I was nearly 40, and had really bad agoraphobia, really bad anxiety. I was recovering from like depression because I'd been laid off from my job. And this job I thought that I would have till retirement, not that it was my calling, but I liked the job. And all of a sudden it was like pulled away from me, and it was like a shit, what do I do now? And I'd always wanted to write. As a kid, I just wrote constantly. I wrote fiction, I made magazines, I made comics, I made my own radio shows, I wrote, but I stopped doing that as an adult because life got in the way.
Yeah.
And writing is, I guess, a luxury. And so while I was recovering, because I couldn't do very much, I bought a little laptop with my redundancy money, and I started a blog. And I thought, well, what do I write about? Well, what do I know? Because they say, write what you know.
Yeah.
So it was a film blog, because I thought, wow, I watch films all the time, so I could write about films. And it never set out to be a career until I've only been freelance since 2017. I was still working like part time in that office job that I sucked at, and I was doing cleaning at night when I took over Diabolique and started my first podcast. I was doing 3 jobs at the same time. So I never thought, oh, that, because everyone kept saying it can't be a job as well. That's all I kept hearing, people going, well, you can't really get paid doing this stuff. But quite early on, I decided I'm not going to work for free. Oh,
Yeah. It's okay.
There's a critic.
There's
yeah,
a there's a voice right there.
he would get food. No, early on, I decided I'm not working for free.
Yeah.
I'm not going to work for free. And if I don't get the work, that's fine. I've seen people make the argument, oh, well, I had to work for a really low rate or for free, or I wouldn't have done the work. Well, don't do the work then.
Yeah.
Go and go and do your own podcast or something on it. Go and do something that benefits you,
Yeah.
not someone else. And also, how great is a company if they're just going to take people that are free? It
Yeah.
shows they don't really value their product, do they?
Exactly. Exactly.
There is
Yeah.
one in particular who I've never worked for, and they did accidentally post a thing on Amazon once, and it was liner notes, any man or woman who will write them. That went up by accident.
Mhm. Oh man.
I won't
Nice.
say who.
But but obviously, like you were talking about that confidence that you've built up over the years got you to this point where I think this particular podcast you're I think at a top point where you got that confidence to where you really could feel like you could speak your voice and not
Yeah.
feel, like you were gonna hurt somebody's feelings or you're gonna, like
Yeah, I did. I
yeah,
did feel like, oh, what if people think I'm, don't care about, black people or gay rights? Or what if they just think I'm being selfish? Well, and it was like that. And then I thought, no, this actually matters. And economic problems matter more than any other thing.
yeah,
And nobody is talking about them. And so we need to talk about them because this is the real issue that we have in society now. And that's our economy.
That's very
yeah,
Yeah.
true. I would say
And even middle class people now. I know I'm slag middle class people off all the time, but I know so many academics now that don't have secure jobs. They don't. That used to be the cushy thing. If you could get a job as an academic, you were set for life. You were on 6-month contracts. A friend of mine, she's actually a working class academic, but halfway through her course, she had to re-interview for a job
mm,
last year, and she's been involved in a lot of union stuff over that, and it is just insane. It's not just even the working classes that are affected by this now, it's middle class people.
yeah.
And still people are going, oh wow, Mark Hamill did this thing, or I'm leaving Twitter because Elon Musk owns. So we're now only using ethically owned companies now.
It's
yeah,
yeah,
there aren't
I don't
many of
think
them.
that would be possible.
yeah,
I
It's literally impossible. There's a list that comes out all the time of like companies that are that are that are right wing, that are left wing, companies you should support because of
like,
moral
why? There's no
things. And
capitalism.
it's
It's
like they're all just trying to get your money either way. There's no. That's the one thing with economics. I think is that economics, it's not, an entity or whatever it is, but it doesn't really care about a lot of those specific things. Like you were just saying, it economics doesn't care, about your race or about things like that. You know what I mean? It affects
they
it,
care
it
what
can
they're
affect
gonna get
everyone similarly.
like, yeah, we're all commodities at the end of the
Mhm.
day, and some of us are not valued as much as others.
And I think we
And
all have to
yeah, that's what it
migrate.
comes down to it.
Yeah, we all have to migrate through the economic systems that we live in to survive. Economic financial things are all things we have to utilize in order to survive. And it's becoming a lot more difficult for a lot of more people, and it's becoming
Yeah,
more difficult for people who it wasn't difficult for before, like you just said, the middle class. I mean, there has been, specifically I could speak from just the United States perspective, there's been a significant erosion of the middle class for the last several decades when it comes to certain economic policies, certain economic changes and things, and the middle class has dipped, further down into the lower class, or the working class,
yeah.
really, and yet the middle class seems to still have this mindset that they're in the middle and that they're safe.
Yeah, because it's the worst thing you can be to be working class, isn't
Yeah,
it?
and it's like,
No one wants to come down
but they're
here. I
convinced
think that
that,
was
like, they're duped into the idea that, oh, that
yeah.
you wanna stay here, but everything else from the people making all of the big decisions is pushing you further down. You should be concentrating your anger, your vitriol through the people who are making it more difficult for you, yet the narrative always seems to be, like you said, Kat,
the culture war,
demonizing
which I
the
don't
lower
yeah, I
class.
don't believe the culture war exists.
Mm,
We now see it's, left versus white, old versus young. straight versus queer. It's all these different divisions that we have, and the media is just constantly pumping out clickbait. Because
Mm.
if you write some clickbait like "Roll Dahl has been censored," right? Everyone will share that, right and left, either to agree with it or to disagree with it. Or if you say, "Oh, the woke people have done this," everyone will share it. Like the woke people will share it to say, "Yeah, the too right," and the right wing will share it to go, "Look at what they're doing." Or if you say, "The MAGAs have done this," and a lot of it is to do with our publishing, and it's all web based now. It's all based on clicks. The quickest way to get clicks to a website is to infuriate someone or post political clickbait. Or people don't see it as political. I mean, you're right, Stephen. They don't see it as actually being political, but it is.
Yeah.
And of course, this absolutely suits the governments. It absolutely suits the people up there. This, like I said, totally unregulated capitalism that has got worse in the last 6 years. It has got, like, you have people like Bezos making how many more billions during the pandemic,
Mhm.
you know? Well, there's people in his warehouses dropping like flies because they can't even get time off
Uh,
with COVID.
yeah.
And this extreme exploitation that I lived through the UK 80s stuff, um, with the miners' strikes and Thatcher's. This is worse. This is a lot worse because it's kind of wow, it's all over the West. Basically, we're
Mm.
seeing this. This is worse. And what we had then that we don't have now was like community solidarity. We had solidarity, people going out and working together to protest. What we have now is distraction. So every time someone posts some clickbait to say, "Oh, this happened or that happened," or Mark Hamill, like, "Don't buy the Harry Potter game," or don't, it's energy that's wasted, and they want you to look at that. The
Mm.
Tories love all that gender stuff here, because at the moment we've got electric and gas bills. British Gas just announced 3 billion profit, and our prices went up 3 times, which was quite remarkable. And the government doing nothing. They'd rather, I think, Boris, one of the things was he was going to have a war on woke. I don't
Mhm.
think the left are doing themselves any good
That's
in that.
happening. That's
We
happening here
they're
as
not all divided in these little categories. Do you know what I mean, though?
yeah, and
Yeah.
a lot of that. I mean, talk about politics. There's so much political gaming that goes on to manipulate people, to distract people,
Mm,
to move them from one subject to another subject so that they don't concentrate on certain things. That happens here all of the time. I mean, just you spoke a lot about economics and gas prices and things like that, power and energy. Same thing is happening, I think, on a global level now. Really,
yeah,
global
we
economics
got
is
terrible
here.
inflation here as well. Really bad inflation.
It's bad here as well. The irony, or not even the irony, just the sickness of it all, sick capitalism of it all, is that the gas prices are through the roof, and there's issues. Yet, the gas corporations, the oil corporations, still post like billions and billions of dollars
Yeah,
in
It's because
revenue. So
it's
it's like,
because it's
what's
about they're not it's not they're not they're not their
they
bottom
created
line's not
false
well,
narratives.
their bottom line's not about, they're always look, capitalism's always about being better the next year and next year.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's not about ever trying to make the same amount of money every year. It's
Oh
about
no,
always
that's
making more
bad.
money. So you're unless other companies and the other workforce all around the world start paying us more money, then it's never going to be even.
No, it's
It's
never
never
going to
going to
be
be able to keep
enough.
up with what they want.
Yeah,
So that's our problem.
as the economies grow and grow, it's there needs to be more and more money, specifically within the capitalist system. More money needs to be pumped in to keep it all working
To keep
efficiently.
the workforce actually,
Is the
being
most
able
important
to
part.
live properly. You can't do that if they're not giving us more money. But what's happening is they want more, and they just want to keep
Yeah,
paying us the same.
not to get
It
into a
might,
whole history of it all, but I think capitalism reached the
it's
point
it's
years.
one of them.
It reached the point years ago, at least from the United States perspective, where they it can function without the people being a key part of it. Like you were just saying, it used to function in like a well-oiled machine, but it got so big that it doesn't it can function on its own right now without
It's
with the
obscene.
people, the working class being
It's
screwed over.
obscene. Yeah, it's obscene. And so part of the podcast was to talk about that, and I wanna talk about being a working class woman because I say this quite a lot. I am a feminist, very open feminist, but again, third wave feminism has all become about identity and, the construction of femininity, and of course, that does affect women, but when you're a working class woman, there's more practical things that you're usually thinking about, not your construction as a woman. You've got this actual reality where you're probably looking after your kids, you're going out doing 2 jobs, and none of that is ever talked about. So we still have all these problems with the wages, sort of, of working class women being some of the lowest in society, because we often have to take smaller hours, lower paid jobs, fit in a load of little jobs around the kids. None of that is being talked about in it. I think there was a very good article, I think, in the Guardian, but I don't remember who it was by. But the writer had sort of said, well, all this talk in the media about diversity and everything, all it has done is served other middle class people. None of that has actually gone down to the actual poorest communities.
Yeah.
It's become like cultural capital now, to sort of say, oh, well, I'm disadvantaged in some way, unless if you're working class, and then you're just like, oh my God, don't let that person in here. They're not polite. But it has become capital for other middle class people. And of course, saying that is problematic now. It's
Mm.
problematic because you have to agree with everything wholesale, like, or you're
Yeah.
outright. And I guess because we're not, we worry about being called that. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, if you call someone like on the outright, oh, you're a horrible bigot, and they don't care. They actually cheer. They think, yeah, the only people that mindset pressures is people that do care, like
Yeah.
don't actually want to be called that, but don't. I just see the movement is very misguided
Mm.
and churned up by the media, and like you said, Andrew, with these companies, they don't care about diversity. I remember when they did the Pride Babadook box. It was like, what's the Babadook got to do with LGBT? And they were selling it in that
Mm.
box with the flag on. And of course, it was amusing to see all the guys triggered by it. But I was like, this is actually quite insulting because it's just a horror film. It's got nothing to do. And whatever company it was, were just selling it with a rainbow box. And
Mm.
it's like, this isn't social justice. This
That
is
happens every year.
capitalism.
Every year in June, which I believe is Pride Month, at least here in
Yeah,
the US,
rainbow
all the
capitalism.
companies come out. All the companies come out for that 1 month, and then you don't hear about them for the rest of the year. Same thing with, like,
Yeah.
Black History Month and stuff like that. They all come out during one specific time of year to capitalize on the zeitgeist and then just don't say anything the rest of the time.
Yeah. Well, it's a problem in society as general is, and I think it's part of just how our lives are structured because of how we have to live. Because like, and I think this is a problem with people's education in when it comes to politics in general. Even somebody like me, I wouldn't sit here and say I'm a really educated political person. I can just speak on what I see through my own life and my own work, my everyday work, and my conversations with people. But because our lives are so busy, and we have to work a lot, and we have to keep up with the normal day-to-day things. We have kids, it makes us only look at certain things, and a lot of them things are not good opinions, and it creates that false narratives. It creates we're only looking at the distractions, the things that they're using to distract us, instead of the things that are actually important. um and to go through
At this
to do
point,
all
I
that
don't
home.
feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think people are acting like it's the decline of civilization. I don't. I'm anti-censorship and
Yeah.
totally fiercely anti-censorship. And I would get really annoyed about. I'd say, oh yeah, they're censoring this, they're censoring that. And then I think, hang on a minute, this is just a smokescreen because those things are still going to be there.
Yeah,
They're still going to be there. They're still going to be accessible. We live in the internet now. You could get
exactly.
any book. They could ban any book. You still be able to get it, right?
Be able
What
to
are they
get it.
going to
Yep.
do?
There was a time when that did play a factor because it was harder to get things, but nowadays, even when somebody's trying to cancel something or anything like that, it's like, well, it's still up to you. Do you want to make the choice to
Hmm.
support that thing or whatever it is, like for instance, I work for Pepsi and we've had things,
Oh,
yeah, but I am
problematic.
I don't work in the office. I do
I'm
actually.
drinking a Tango, and I think they might be owned by. They're either owned by Pepsi or Coca
Oh, okay.
Cola.
But there
I
was a thing that came out about Coca-Cola. Like something happened where like there was like emails sent around and somebody said something racist that worked for Coke. And so then I would get all these kind of usually older white males that would come to me a lot of times while I'm working, and they'll say like, "I will never buy a Coke again." Only just because it was
It's
something.
always them, though, isn't it? This
Yeah,
is the thing. I'm saying people. It's them.
yeah. Yeah, and I'm like, "This is the stance you're taking? This is where you care? Is that because somebody
and
for a big
I ain't your
company
best.
said something that you found racist to you, white guy, and
I
now
think
you're now
Coke have
you
done
this is the
worse
stance you
things.
wanna take?" Like,
It's
I'm
a,
like
it's
I'm like, "Okay."
it's an
Like,
interesting hill to die. What's
and
interesting is like that was his like last straw. Was
yeah,
they came for his beverage and they just couldn't take it anymore.
I
Not
was
the
like,
hundreds of years of oppression and horrific events prior. It was the Coca Cola that got him.
Yeah. Which is just as
and
bad
that
as a guy
yeah,
saying he's never eaten M&Ms because they've put women M&Ms on the front, and it's like they're
yeah,
M&Ms. They're not even people. Like,
They
what
don't.
is
They're
this?
not
And he's
real.
stamping on them. Phil, that guy who I thought he was a parody, he's an actual guy. I
yeah,
looked him up, stamping on the M&Ms, going, if you eat these, buy these M&Ms, you're a beta male. And then you've got the ones on the left who are like, the male feminists are the worst. I've never been mansplaining feminism so much in my entire life,
yeah,
or had 2-day arguments with so-called left-wing people, men who are explaining a situation that actually affects me as a woman to me,
yeah,
but they know. And then they make these little gestures and they want you to applaud them.
Yeah,
And I think
that's an
social
issue.
media drives that. Yeah, it's social media, isn't it? It's
It
validation. It's easy
yeah,
to do that.
when it comes to like you were just saying it, when you push yourself too far on a political spectrum, I think you end up kind of falling into negative territory, like you just said.
We are living in a live action South Park episode now. This is our life now. But
mhm,
it's true.
yeah,
Our society's become that, so extreme on both sides. We're just a bunch of people in the middle, not saying anything because sorry, the hassle. Just like what the hell is going on?
yeah,
Like what the hell is going on? And a lot of it is social media and the media driving that because it's very easy to go on the Spotify one. I didn't even know Joe Rogan was until the Spotify thing. And I looked at a bit of his thing and I thought that's probably not someone I'm going to be into. He drinks protein drinks and he looks like a bro, like
yeah,
Mm.
steaks and things. But, there's a lot of things on Spotify that I don't like. Cliff Richard's music, for a start.
yeah,
I was probably not on there anymore. But it was like people were cancelling their Spotifys and posting the exit survey and getting applauded. It's like, the hell?
Uh,
A mutual friend of mine, though, this guy made a big scene about it, kept posting his exit surveys. And then a mutual friend that we have, he was actually following this guy on Spotify. So he cancelled his Spotify, but he was still on Spotify, just on the free one, because he could see
yeah.
his activity. And that is what he's become now. That is politics now. And
oh,
it's like,
very
no, we have
performative.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
performative. That's the perfect word for it.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Apparently, that's right wing to say people are performative now.
you can still be politically active, and yet you don't have to advertise it a lot. I mean, you can certain, I think, social stances and things like that. I think I've reached the point where you can make yourself uh, known and yet not known in a flamboyant way. You know what I mean? Like you can make your political views known, but like you were just saying, you don't have to post the exit survey from Spotify to make it seem as if you're better
Yeah,
than someone
it
else.
is entirely performative. It's
Yeah,
like those people that go around feeding homeless people, and they just so happen to film it to put it on Instagram or
Yeah.
TikTok.
it's like
It's
you it
just go
it doesn't
help out at a
change.
homeless shelter. Don't film yourself. It's
Yeah,
very
it doesn't make that act better. It's still a good act. You don't it the filming
but it's
yourself doing it
self-involved.
doesn't change.
It's very self-involved though. It's very
It's very egotistical.
yeah, it's very narcissistic, I think. I don't think a lot of these people actually care that much. They're all about their
It's
image
about
and
status. It's about status.
Mm,
yeah,
very
I'm very good, and they're trawling through people's tweets and they're looking at things that might be problematic, or you've got the right wing ones who
Yeah.
are just insane in a whole other way. And it is this like weird mythical war that's going on
yeah.
because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, the funniest thing is the first podcast that I did, I've only done 2, but the first one, a Trump supporter emailed me and said he agreed with a lot of what I had to say, especially about the economy. And you shouldn't speak to a Trump supporter, bad people. I mean, I've said things about Trump supporters before in the past, but I thought this is really good because it actually opened up a discussion with someone who's complete like on the political spectrum. We're probably like complete opposites, but we had a little conversation over email. It was very respectful, and we found common ground in there. We found we had issues with the economy, and I thought this is good. This is good. It shows there is potential if we stop saying to people, okay, boomer, or, blah, 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 and shutting people off and saying, well, you're old, or you're too straight, or you're a man, and no men can speak now, or you're this, or this automatic assumption that everybody who is white and male has power. I don't believe in that either. I don't believe in universal male privilege. There is male privilege, but again, it's like rich men.
Mm,
They leave that part off.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
It
I've said this to many people many times. I think there's a lot more in our society and our culture that connect us than divide us. The problem
Yeah, I
is
think
that
so.
you is
it's
discovering
too much
those things.
it's too much work for people to
To discover
investigate
those
people's
things.
they everybody wants to put everything into a nice little category so that it makes it easier in their life. They don't have to do the work.
Light yeah,
And that comes back to what I was saying earlier
the
about
world isn't clean, you
it's
know?
the world is so bit we're so busy that our minds can only take in so much information that I feel like we try to compartmentalize things. And so when it comes to important things about our daily lives that we don't feel like we have the time to deal with, we just pick a generalization and we stick it to a whole bunch of things, and then that's how we get through our day, so we don't have to think about it. um we've already made up our minds on some things, and that's the problem. And maybe some of it is to maybe get rid of some of them distractions. We're distracted by too many things. Maybe we need to cut out some distractions and be able to give ourselves the opportunity to discover more nuanced things and more important things that are actually going to affect us every day. um so
Yeah, I don't think we're designed to to have that amount of exposure to so many people,
no.
though. I don't think we have the emotional capacity. That's why I've never liked Twitter, because it is a bit like opening up on a global stage and shouting into a room full of millions of people.
Yeah.
And I much prefer Facebook because I can keep it locked, small, to
Mm.
people that I actually know who they are,
Yeah, yeah.
what they're doing. Because I don't think we're not designed to have that sort of cultural power, or that sort of, where everything becomes valid and everything becomes a point. So I do have a Twitter, but I'll go in, retweet things, leave very
Yeah,
quickly. Like I can't
not get caught
look
in the
at the
web. Yeah. Uh,
oh my
uh,
god, like
yeah,
2 minutes of that feed and I'm like, "No, gotta
yeah,
get out of there.
yeah.
Not looking at that now."
But I do want to bring this back to film. Of course, we've had some. I think we've had a nice political discussion here. I hope it didn't turn too many people of our podcast
Yeah, people
off.
will be complaining
I
now. I
know.
It's
do this
fine.
on
When did
I
it
don't.
turn
podcasts.
into a
I did it
political
to Mike
podcast?
White.
If there's anything, Kat, that we have in common is that there's a lot of things I don't give a shit about, and one of them is that if people complain about something that I've done that I feel like was very good. Like we just had a really nice discussion about politics and what and if you don't if it's not what you're into, that's fine. You can skip this part of the episode or just skip this episode entirely. But
Yeah. We
it
are
was
gonna bring it
valuable.
back to movies.
It was valuable for me. So I'm okay with it. So it's gonna be on my podcast feed. But we are gonna bring it back to movies a little bit here, and we would like to talk about some films. We won't spend crazy amount of time on this, but I would like to bring up some films that we feel like represent that have positively, not positively, but like have really did a great job at representing the working class in some way. And I went at this in a kind of an interest. I kind of wanted to pick films that kind of um, looked at the working class on different stages in the sense of like our personal lives. But Kat, I'd like to start with you. What's a film that means a lot to you that delves into the working class?
Oh, there's a few. The work of Alan Clark.
Mm,
I
yeah.
don't know if you know him, especially Scum, Made in Britain,
Yep.
Rita Sue and Bob Too, and The Firm. I think because Alan Clark was working class, because we do have an issue in Britain of kitchen sink drama and Ken Loach and all that, where basically poor people become either figures of extreme pity or they're just there to, like I Daniel Blake in service of a
Yes.
social commentary. The work of Alan Clark was so different because those characters they're not perfect, but they're alive,
Yeah.
and they're full of fight and they're full of humor. Humor is one of the biggest resilience, the biggest coping tool that we have in working class culture. It's why a lot of us just laugh at anything and are always getting ourselves into trouble in this climate. But it is a good coping mechanism. It helps you. And to see that in Rita Sue and Bob too, those characters are so funny. But it's often overlooked in films about the poor. Everyone's walking around, they're so sad, they're like, oh, they're all grey. So I love that Nil by Mouth, which I just did
Mm,
an essay on actually for BFI. Have
yes.
just upgraded that. Gary Oldman's only film as a director, and Jesus Christ, I mean, it's not an easy watch, but again, he wanted to make a film about his life. And for the new one, Sean Baker
Nice.
again gives us characters that are not there as pity figures. These are vivid, real character across the board in his films. Tangerine,
Mm,
Red Rocket, The Florida Project. So I first saw The Florida Project, I thought that's me when I
hmm
was 21.
yeah.
And just the stuff it says about cast, incredible, just absolutely incredible. But these characters are real people, and I just want to see people. So they're probably my top ones. Um, but cast comes out in film in all different
It
ways, in
does.
all different ways. We don't always notice it so much. Um, Another really good one I like is an Australian film called Kenny. Have either of you ever seen that one?
It sounds familiar.
No one's ever seen
I'm
this
sorry, I've heard the
film that I
title.
mentioned
I've
it.
heard the
I'm like,
title. I've heard the title, but I don't know. I don't probably haven't seen it, but I feel like
it's
I've
just
heard the
about
name
this
mentioned.
guy. He installs toilets, or he sells he sells toilets, and he just goes around to these conventions and stuff. And he's this really lonely guy, and I think he's divorced and everything. It's just all about that character, but it's so wonderful. I think it was 2006, maybe. Kenny. I
Well,
mentioned that film, and no one's seen it.
Well, I'm probably just I'm saying it sounds familiar because we were talking about South Park and Kenny's in there. He dies a lot. No, I'm
Yeah,
kidding. No, I'm
Kenny.
just kidding. I'm just kidding. But no,
Kenny
I've
doesn't get
definitely not
killed in
seen
it.
the movie, but definitely check it out.
Yeah, he's just an everyday guy, just
Yeah,
going about his job, and he's really into his job as well, but he's got all these other problems. And I just thought it was
yeah,
such a lovely film, like weird little understated film.
yeah. A few that I picked out. I kind of wanted to pick ones that kind of I felt like the characters were dealing with their working class lives in different ways. One movie I picked out was a film from 1960 called Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. With
I love that
yeah,
film.
yeah, Albert Finney.
Albert Finney.
Yeah, and it's kind of part of that kind of genre, you could say, of films that came from Great Britain at the time. Like the kind of angry young men,
Yeah.
kind of genre. And so Albert Finney's a working class guy, works in a factory, and he is having these two relationships with two different women. One where he's the woman is actually already married, and then the other one it's kind of playful, but it doesn't seem to be going much of anywhere throughout most of the movie. And it's kind of interesting how it deals with he's this angry guy who's always complaining about his job, and he's always complaining about how his life is going, but he's also you know dealing with something very important, is and he's also doesn't respect his parents, doesn't
He
respect.
doesn't wanna settle, though. This is, I
Yeah,
think, the most powerful thing about that film is
yeah,
because it represents this post-war British working class culture
yeah.
where, and if, I'd recommend, if you haven't seen it, My Generation by Michael Caine, because he talks
Okay.
all about how he came out in that generation that came out just after the war, and he was like, "We were taught to respect our uppers," and it was like, "We're not gonna do that." And so Finney doesn't wanna get tied down. He
Yes.
wants to go places. He's got dreams, and I think it's such a subversive film because working class people aren't supposed to have dreams. And you're supposed to get married, supposed to
Yeah.
settle
That's the
down, you know,
idea, is
yeah,
that, he's falling in, even though he's fighting it the whole time, he's falling into what his parents are, which is that they're
yeah,
working and they're married and they're doing that normal day-to-day thing that he just is trying to fight against. And that's why he
mm.
has this woman on the side, or he has this woman that's married already on the side. And then, of course, I don't want to give away the whole story. I don't want to say the whole plot, but by the end of the movie, he kind of almost falls into that, without even trying, and it's just an interesting parallel to see that, and to see that it's kind of sad. It's sad in a way, sad
It's
that.
kinda depressing. It
Yeah,
is kinda depressing because 'cause you're like, yeah, he's stuck, but it's also a very powerful film.
yeah,
It's also a very powerful film because it's one of the first films that kind of acknowledges that, working class people before the war, when they turn up in British films, they're always like these little chimney sweeps, or they're
yes,
like, the landlady at the pub, or the prostitute, or they're always cockneys.
yes,
And it was just so, and the other important thing was that was like one of the first times actual regional accents were seen in British film.
mm,
Um, um, and even now we have a problem with accents here. I don't know if it's the same in the US, but in here, regional accents, if someone knows exactly where you're from as soon as you open your mouth.
yeah.
And so to have those, like, actors actually talk in their own accents, it's incredible. And you've got Albert Finney being a northerner in it, and he's like, yeah. So it is sad, but it's also very powerful film, I think.
Definitely, I agree. Another one I wanted to bring up, and this one I would say is more on the. I guess in a sense you could say both my next two picks are kind of more mainstream. I guess I don't know. I'm bringing up 1979's Norma Ray, with
You
Sally
I
stole
don't
Field.
think I've seen that. I
You
don't
haven't
think I've
seen it?
seen
you
that.
I
stole one of
believe
mine.
No.
I stole one of Andrew's. So,
Nice.
but
Well, there
this is
goes that idea.
the film that Sally Field won her Best Actress award for. And of course gave the big speech. You love me, you really love me. I believe this was for that award. I believe, right?
I think
Um,
so.
I think so. But in this film, Norma Ray plays a young single mom who works at a textile worker, a factory. I believe they're using cotton products, and they're like building, making tons of different things. And her whole family works there. It's kind of a generational thing. Her mom works in the factory with her. Her dad works in the factory with her. And so the whole film is showing this kind of like struggle of this single mom trying to just get by, and then this guy who works for the union, a union, comes in and starts to help try to bring the workers together to start a union, and then there's a relationship that kind of bonds between this main guy who comes in and Sally Field, and there's kind of a really sweet relationship there, and then she's also having this new relationship with this other man who's kind of the first kind of man who's been good to her in her life, and that's one of the interesting things about this film too. It's not only talking about the working class and all that, but it's also talking about this character who's had really bad relationships with, has really differing relationships with men. Her father and all the men. She's obviously had kids, but the men are not in her lives anymore. And then there's this guy coming in from this union where they kind of feel like there's some romanticness there, but it never goes that far. It becomes more of a respect thing. And she's learning from him and he's learning from her, and it's really nice. And I just, it's a little bit more on the crowd pleaser side, I would say, by the end of it, but it's like, it really is still a really, I think, nice film.
I'll
And
have to
I
check it out. I haven't
yeah,
seen that one. I do like a little bit of Sally Field,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
haven't seen an awful lot of her films, I don't think.
yeah. Well, I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Andrew, please tell us some of you said I
Yeah,
took
well,
one of your,
Steven just stole mine. Just to piggyback off Norma Ray. Norma Ray was also directed by Martin Ritt, who I thought was just an underrated director. He directed Paul Newman in a few films, specifically The Long Hot Summer and HUD,
Ah.
which I two films that I really like. But for me, a lot of my introduction to kind of the working class is, coincidentally have, Kat here is through British cinema, and was a lot through the kitchen sink cinema Sally, I almost called Kat
Ken
Sally Field.
Loach.
Kat that Kat just
Call me
mentioned,
Sally Field.
60s British cinema and stuff like that. I have a whole, like, BFI, like, I think it's like a book of essays about British, uh, realism and stuff like that. But, one director who I really latched on to early on, which wasn't really part of that whole 60s scene, came on later on, was Mike Leigh, and I feel like he kinda does a lot of the
I
similar work.
love Mike
Oh,
Leigh.
good, I'm
See,
glad.
I can't abide Ken Loach these days. He's gone too far up his ass, but Mike Leigh, I just love him.
Yeah, Mike Leigh
He's
was someone I attached to right away. I saw um, a lot of his work during like the first ever course I took on film history, and I think the professor was a really big fan of his. But a couple of his films that were really grasped me is an early film from 1990, Life is Sweet. I
Mm.
think is super
Oh,
underrated and
yeah.
not talked about. I bought this like on a blind buy Criterion just because it was Mike Leigh, like when it came out for like a decade ago, I think. And then I just recommended it to people constantly. It's it has the Mike Leigh type of social commentary and stuff like that, and bring it to a very human level, but it's based on a family, where I feel like a lot of his films are usually about individuals for the most part. I know later on he would do like All or Nothing, which is also
Mm.
about like a family system and stuff
That's
like
a
that.
good
But
one.
Life is Sweet really grasped me, because of just the structure of it and its staying power and its contemporary things it was going through, where it's really getting into, you have this idea of the family unit, the structure, the mom, the dad, the two children, but there's always existential things going on that level, despite whatever the normal traditional structure may be. And I feel like he does that a lot, where he gives us
Yeah.
like what the normal structure should be, and then goes underneath and shows us the reality of it all. And he does that constantly throughout his work. And I think something that's even more different than that, and probably one of his more just straight political films, in my opinion, is a film he did years earlier in 1983 called Meantime with Tim Roth. Um,
Oh, yeah.
this film, when I know during the maybe not during, but I think early.
I should say Tim Roth was in one of the Alan Clarks I mentioned as well.
Mm.
And I Finally,
Made
you
in Britain.
mentioned, I think,
It's crazy to me, it's like all this Hollywood thing now
yeah,
because I knew him as,
Gary
like,
Oldman is
Trevor,
you mentioned Gary
Yeah.
Oldman, he's in this film as
Gary
well.
Oldman.
he plays like this young punk rock anarchist or whatever that is as Tim Roth's friend. But what is so interesting about this movie is that it was made during the Margaret Thatcher years, which is notorious for being just oppressive to the working class, just
Yes.
union busting, and just you just mentioned kind of people not having jobs, and people no economic movement whatsoever, just a stagnancy within Great Britain during the 1980s, during Margaret Thatcher's reign, I guess. And this movie just shows that, where just like, especially the youth culture perspective, where there's nothing for them to do. There's no, hope or outlook of a meaningful life past childhood, just a,
Yeah, that's was basically my life. I was into punk, I was into metal. That's how I got into the more extreme horror, and it was all because there was bugger all else to do. So the subcultures of the day, that's all we had. We had no like prospects. So I had a kid at 17. There were no prospects. So what am I going to do now? Like just get drunk. Like there was nothing,
and
no
it,
college, no
it
job.
it
Yeah.
brings up the idea of like, what is the role of government in the life of the citizens? Are they supposed to be the ones to create those opportunities, or is it private sector things that's supposed to do it? And then when one fails or the other fails or they both fail, where do the people go? What do? They just try to get work every day.
Well, we're
There's
seeing that now. They go and work for Amazon or Uber.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they go.
yeah,
Well, I mean, even we
That's
saw.
what's happened now. We're seeing the neoliberalism
Right.
as, the legacy of Reagan and Thatcher. This is what we're living now.
We saw
yeah.
that, I think, when when COVID hit, I specifically here in the United States, we talked about it a little bit at the time during on this podcast, and just people in general around, just like the infrastructure that was put in place to handle crises like this situation completely fell apart when it came to the unemployment system, when it came to healthcare systems, when it came to just health systems in general, economic systems put in place weren't structurally strong enough to handle a devastation on this level. And it's like, what do people do? Hold up in their houses. It's kind of what happened. And is it the government's, uh, you know, uh, duty to then serve the citizens, and then how far does it go? And then people were having arguments about that people were just going to stay home and not go back to work, and then all this, and it's been a whole big mess for the last like 4 years, and it's probably going to be a mess forever now. I think it changed everything economically and
I
culture.
don't think it can stay like this forever, though. It's unsustainable at this point.
Yeah,
It really is.
yeah,
I just
It's
don't. It's just
unsustainable. I
interesting.
can't. Yeah,
It's interesting
it's
that a movie from the
where.
'80s is also commenting on something that is also an issue now, but that seems to be the
But
case.
we've come full circle, I think, because we're back there. I keep evoking the 80s all the time. Well, I haven't thought about the 80s since I lived in the 80s, but then I find myself listening to old punk from the 80s that I used to listen to, but then became entirely irrelevant. And you'd listen to it in the 90s or the early 2000s, and you'd be like, oh, this is irrelevant now. But now all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, this is really
yeah,
relevant.
yeah,
Uh,
Gonna get these old punk albums back. It's depressing.
oh
I
yeah,
don't think it's sustainable in its current form, though. I think something has to give. You
yeah.
know, I mean,
Hopefully,
we
very
will all be
true.
replaced by AI. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it kind of a different, spectrum, getting kind of like in more broader subject. Um, I always find the history of like unionizing, specifically in the United States, to be rather fascinating. And a movie I wanted to mention was Matewan, the movie from
Hmm.
1987, the John Sayles film. That just got a
I don't
Criterion
know that
release.
film. I don't know that film.
Yeah, it's about labor organizers unionizing in a mining community in the 1920s. So we're talking like early kind of union,
Mm.
um, trying, trying to create a union, stuff like that. Chris Cooper's in the film, James Earl Jones, Mary McDonnell, David Strathairn. Um, I thought it was a really great film. It's Yeah, I was fascinating with the history of that's why I want to include Norma Ray with that too, but Steven destroyed that little
Yeah, I
pairing.
destroyed it.
Um, and it just kind of like the importance of, I think, unionizing in the United States often gets overlooked. And I think unions, even in modern context, get criticized. And I'm like, without unions
Well,
or
they do here. We got strikes here now, and all the press have been like, "Oh, they're causing trouble. You're not going to be able to get to work. You're not. If you have an emergency, the hospital's not going to treat you. Look at these terrible, terrible people." But it's like in 2020, the bus drivers, the transport workers, and the healthcare people, they were like essential workers. We were
oh
all
yeah,
like
we were
clapping
championing.
for them every week.
We wanted
It's
we
like,
wanted to give them
now
the
they're
everything.
evil because they won't pay.
Yeah, now yeah, I thought about that earlier. I'm glad you brought that up. Specifically here, hospital workers, nurses, doctors, physician
I
assistants,
I
whomever.
was considered a, essential worker.
Yeah,
I worked in the grocery stores.
yeah, grocery store
I had to
workers,
work.
people who
Yeah.
delivered food to people's houses, specifically for the
Yeah,
elderly
now
and the
though it's like
disabled.
all plebs now,
Yeah, and then
but
now that they want like, I don't know, like better lives or just like economic solidarity or economic foundations, no, we can't give them higher wages or anything like that. Screw them essentially. And
Yeah,
it's
we
baffling
realized
to
how
me.
important all that stuff is, and then our
It
the
was
attention
I
spans are
they
thought our
say
time had come. I had this weird, like, little pocket for I was obviously being a complete idiot for about 4 months where I thought, "They finally realised the importance of the working class. This is amazing." And then it's like, "No,
it disappeared
no."
like like they had amnesia.
poof. I forgot people's attention spans are this small
Yeah,
now.
it's like
You
they're
know,
out here
but
literally like trying to save people's lives. And a lot of them ended up, people who worked in hospitals ended up contracting the COVID and ended up dying, doctors, nurses, and stuff like that. And then, and then other people in that industry later on, we just kind of left them out, just nothing.
yeah,
It's
yep.
baffling to me.
Sorry, mate.
No, you're okay. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But the one other thought we do need to wrap it up here. It's
Yes.
get my wife's gonna kill me because I've been on here for so long. But
That's what happens
but
when you have time.
Because
yeah,
my
well.
son was, like, coming to the door looking because he's wait "In a minute, we're just wrapping up."
You're wrapping up. One more film I was
'Cause
gonna
I still
bring up.
order food.
Yeah. One more film I was gonna bring up. It is a more modern film. I thought dealt with the working class, and it also deals with racial the racial classes in different ways. Like and that's the film "Sorry to Bother You" from 2018, where
Mm.
you have like this man who's getting this he's getting a job, he's got to pay his bills, and then he gets told while he's working that he needs to start acting more like a white person to do his job better.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this, but I haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Yeah, it's got a lot of comedy in it. So, like you were saying earlier, through comedy and drama, you can learn a lot about society. And in this film, the hook of the trailers you saw a lot of times was that he had to talk like a white guy because he was a teleoperator. Or he was talking on the phone with people all the time. And if he talked more like a white person, he would get better sales, and that he would move up the company ladder.
Mm.
And so that's talking about the structure and about our place in the workforce, depending on your race and your class, is all in there. And then, of course, there's they get to almost a surreal level where they get very literal with what we call workhorses. And we see people literally turn into horses in the movie.
Oh,
It's,
spoiler
it's,
alert.
it's a really
I
weird,
need to see this.
Out of
but it's a
context,
really
you say it
it's
doesn't.
a really
Yeah.
weird film about working class and about race within that, and I think it's one of them films that kind of
Yeah.
it was out there when it came out, and now it's kind of like I don't hear anybody talking about it anymore. I'm like, it's a really good film.
Yeah,
um
I have a few more like that. Sorry We Missed You. We talked a little about Ken Loach earlier. That was one of Ken Loach's newer films, kind of taking a direct stab at Amazon and that type of
Yes,
work
and
and
that is
whatnot.
Amazon. I can't with
Yeah,
Citizen
that's why
Kane
I
anymore.
almost didn't mention it. I almost didn't mention it.
You can
you
like
still
him.
Yeah,
you can
I
still
just
like
had
it,
a few
Andrew.
I
It's
words
still,
with
okay.
him.
yeah,
I love Kez still. I'll give him that. I
yeah.
still love
He's
Kez.
still
I like
making the
Riff
same.
Raff.
He's still making the
I
same
still
movies
like
he made
Riff
in the
Raff.
70s. I mean, that is, but
It's like Ken, come on.
it kind of shows that times really don't change if he's still making the same movie 50 years later. Still poking at the same type of social economic problem. But I think a movie like uh, I don't know if you've seen the movie, Steven. The movie Pride, I think, is really good from
Think so.
2014. It's dealing with like gay political activists and coal miner activists in the 1980s, and it deals with like their relationship in terms of like trying to not only get economic rights but also like cultural rights within the community, and coal miners being part of the working class, and then gay advocates
Ah,
just fighting
I
for
I haven't seen
existence.
that film, but I was reading about this the other week, completely coincidentally, I think 'cause I was just reading about unions in general, and
Yeah, it
I found this essay on the sort of gay rights movement and the miners coming together. I'm like, "This is brilliant."
Yeah,
Yeah.
based on a true story, which was very, eye-opening to me. The movie stars Bill Nighy, Imelda Staunton, who has, I think, been in Mike Leigh work, Patty Considine, Dominic West. Um, yeah, I think it's a really great underrated film. Yeah, it's been out for 8 years now.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd not heard of it. I'd not even heard of it. I only knew about that story because I was reading about it. It didn't even mention the film in the article I
oh,
was reading.
Yeah.
I just thought that's really cool
Yeah.
because we had a lot more common ground then. We had a lot more common ground, and I think, not to stretch out the podcast anymore, but a lot of it was to do with, we had physical communities as well,
Yeah.
and I think gentrification has played a lot into this as well.
Mm.
So, our when we lived on an estate, everybody kind of watched out for each other, and we might have had different political views. I mean, there's plenty of working class Tories, but at the end of the day, we'd recognise that, the poverty, the job loss,
Yeah.
um, and I think it's difficult to have that in online, in a way, like that physical thing where it's more a remove now, where people are just slinging things at each other.
Yeah.
But it's, again, this why films about class are important, because then you can have discussions around them and they can make you think about things in a different way, because they're not necessarily kept like Mike Leigh doesn't come at you with like, this is a political film, but of course it's always about class with Mike Leigh, but he's funny and his characters are just so funny and quirky a lot of the time, and interesting, that he sort of slips these little things in under the radar. And I know Citizen Ken doesn't, but
yeah, he
but Mike Lee's very good at
he
that.
makes it
He's
feel
very
natural
good.
because the package
Yeah.
that he puts it in, he puts it in a very real, like grassroots type of package, as opposed to most, I think, politically leaning directors, like that when they hit you with it, they make it obvious. He doesn't. He puts it in a nice way to deliver it to us. Um, yeah, I've always been a
Like
big
you said,
Mike Leigh
there's
fan.
so much in his films as well. There's so many layers. There's so many different things that come up in his films, and they're just so rich. I never go to film festivals, but the town where I grew up, Cheltenham, which is just down the road from me now, they do have this film festival every year, and it's usually full of art holes, so I never go. And it's usually these like, but they had Mike Leigh there a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, and it was on my birthday. So my dad, who got me into Mike Leigh when I was a kid, so he loves him, I rang him up and I'm like, Mike Lee's at this thing. So we went and we watched Bleak Moments, which BFI put that one out. um, we watched Bleak Moments, and he did a Q&A, and this whole thing was full of these like very bourgeois, puffy, wine and cheese film people whose questions were like a thesis. And he was just shooting them down. He was just
Yeah.
shooting. I just saw, and we were going out, and he was just there, and I really wanted to talk to him, but he looked tired, and
Yeah.
he was on about his ride to his hotel, and I thought, I'm not going to bother him because he's quite old now as well. But I was that close to Mike Leigh, I could have touched him.
Yeah.
Like, I've never met anyone famous, and I was just like, oh my god.
Oh man.
But he was so funny because he wouldn't. Those people didn't realise that the sort of people that turn up in his films that he takes a piss out of.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah,
Kat, yeah, let's wrap it up here. We could go on. I think we could keep going if we want.
yes.
The dog said no, though.
Yeah,
The
I
dog
know.
said
That
no.
dog is protesting.
Holding the pot now.
But Kat, thank you for hanging
Sorry.
out. Oh, you're good. Thank
No,
you for hanging
thank
out with
you.
us.
This
I
was
didn't really
fun.
think we were going to talk this long, but it was fantastic. I
It's
loved it.
me.
I
It's
know.
not. It's both. It's all of us. We all like to talk. But this was fantastic. I might have to make this its own episode now that it's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, I think.
I think you may have to just
I
put it
might just
on
have
its
to make
own.
this its own
Yeah.
episode. But of course, please go check out all of Kat's work. She's got stuff on Blu-rays. You'll see them all. She's got good stuff coming out. I believe you have something coming on the Hanging at Picnic Rock.
Yeah, I've got a little essay in there on
Yeah.
folk horror. Good job we didn't get onto that, or we'd be here all night.
Yeah, I know, right?
What is
But you got stuff coming out all the time, and then of course, please go check out Kat's new podcast, The Working Class Feminist. That's on Spotify. It's also on iTunes, and of course, go check out that new Arrow documentary, Orchestrating Storms. Story of Jean Rollin. It's fantastic. Thank you, Kat, for joining us.
No, thank you.